Here. Okay, so we're going to kick it off here. Welcome everybody to Helicopter Pilot Study Group number 23. This is a place where our pilots of all skill levels can get together, give presentations, followed by discussion. It's great for CFI candidates who want to work on their lesson plans, or just students who want to kind of teach and talk about a particular task or topic that they want to talk about and learn about. Every once in a while, we get the luxury of having a heavy hitter in the industry. And today we have Jessica Meiris, who I've actually had the opportunity to fly with back in the day, or well, not back in the day. It was only like a year and a half ago, but it was an outstanding flight. I learned a lot, and so I'm thrilled. We've kept in touch over the year or a year and a half or so, and thrilled to have her here today. She's extremely accomplished, and today she's going to talk to us about mountain flying. That's it from me, Jessica. We'll let you take it away.
All right, fabulous. Thanks for being here. For those of you who just joined, I may need a brief interruption when I need to sign off some maintenance paperwork. I'm here at our maintenance hangar after just finishing a flight. And I'm also on duty. We're technically out of service right now, so it's very unlikely that my duty phone will ring, but if it does, I do need to answer it. So apologize for any of those interruptions, but part of the job. So without further ado, we'll go to my mountain flying gear in this presentation here. And I've delivered this presentation several times, and it's evolved over the years. And I'm always open to feedback, obviously questions if you have questions. If it's immediate, it's appropriate to address it right in the moment. Feel free to interrupt me, no offense taken. Otherwise, we'll leave time at the end to go over any questions that you have. And I want to be sure here that I am seeing what you guys are seeing. Okay, so you should be seeing the disclaimer part of it now, because I lost my my cast through Discord.
We see that. If you try doing the pop out in the lower right corner, it'll give you the ability to do both. If you don't want to bother with that, then whatever you do will show up on screen.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Oh, I think I see the pop out. Okay. Yeah, but it's only showing me the cast of characters and not my tab. Not my presentation tab.
Okay, you can't. If you go to your presentation, you should be able to control it from your presentation, and it'll make live adjustments on screen.
Okay, cool. So you're seeing the disclaimer slide now.
We're not seeing anything now.
Man, we had it all figured out.
We did have it.
Okay, hang tight. Let's begin.
What's up, Triana? Welcome, bud.
Hey, John. Good to see you, man.
Likewise.
It's been busy. Glad I could jump on for this one.
Yeah, we're excited to hear some feedback after Jessica's presentation from you guys.
All right, now you should be seeing the mountain flight awareness home screen.
And it is thinking. There it is. We're back. I'll let you take it away.
Confirmed?
Yep. Yep, we see
Yes,
it.
sir.
We see it.
We got it.
Okay. All right, super. So disclaimer, of course, every presentation comes with one of these. So I have done this presentation several times for a fixed wing audience. So if you are a fixed wing pilot, a lot of these concepts will apply to fixed wing, but they're primarily helicopter centered. And this is mainly a mountain terrain presentation, but it's more about getting you through the terrain and a little bit less about landings, takeoffs and landings within mountain terrain. I'm actually working on a presentation just for that topic. So we'll make that happen at some point. But for now, this is more about flying through and around mountain ranges and some of the winds and associated hazards that can come with that. And of course, never a replacement for hands-on instruction and training, which I would highly recommend if you are flying or want to fly in the mountain environment. There are a lot of courses out there that you can take, or you can hire an instructor, people who have experience, to learn some of the hands-on components of mountain flying. This presentation is centered around 5 main categories: helicopter performance section, environmental, including wind. That's probably one of the most valuable components of it if you are doing or want to do mountain flying. The crew side of things, spatial disorientation, some of the other physiological factors of mountain flying. And then navigation, how relying on the pink line that ForeFlight spits at you can get you into trouble, as it did and had the opportunity to get me into trouble once. That's a personal story I'll share with you. And then lastly, backcountry preparation. Not so much backcountry survival. I do have a separate presentation on that, but just the very basics of what to carry with you and where to put it in the aircraft. Starting with performance, no matter what you're doing in the mountains, even if you're just flying through, plan for out-of-ground effect hover performance, because you never know if you will need to make an emergency landing in the mountain environment. But because you may need to do that, you can't plan on IG performance. Off-airport landings, whether it be rocky above tree line or in a clearing around trees over grass, it doesn't really matter. Have that extra buffer of planning for OG hover performance. And then making sure your machine is up to the job. A lot of people think that a twin engine helicopter, bigger equals better, and it has higher performance and useful load limitations. But actually, that's not true. Often, those twin engine helicopters, I gave the example here of the AW109, does not outperform some single engine helicopters on the market. For example, the H-25 A-Star or the MD-500 series, which are probably the two most common mountain environment single engine helicopters you're going to see. Why? Because they are the best bang for the buck in terms of performance out of weight and their capacity to be super versatile, altitude and configuration capability. So when you're looking at helicopter performance, one way to approach it that's somewhat uncommon in the flight school environment, look at your performance charts and figure out what you're doing every day for OGE and IGE hover. But in the mountains, things change so much with wind, temperature, altitude, density, altitude, that approaching performance as a temperature altitude envelope rather than a specific number is a great way to approach mountain flying. It accounts for those changing conditions or any of those weird situations you might come across, like a temperature inversion layer. So here's an example of an envelope chart, and it's set up a little bit strangely from a European mountain flying manual. But what I really want you to look at is the right section there where it says helicopter out-of-ground effect at the top, and those columns that are running vertically. And that accounts for changing takeoff mass or fuel at varying temperatures. And temperatures being will always shift with your altitude and with the course of the day. So it's great to have an idea of this bigger picture, this outside view, this, like a zoomed out view of your performance, and write that down so you can reference it, whether it be in your EFB, your iPad, on a notes section, or scratch pad in ForeFlight, or if you have a chart like this that you can write and have on your new board or have with you so you can reference any of those changing factors with your OAT gauge on the helicopter and with your changing altitude. Another component is icing and fog. Obviously, flying in known icing conditions is a big no-go. While there are a few IFR-capable helicopters out there that have anti-icing systems, it's not the norm. So if you do encounter icing conditions, that's a land and live situation. Some signs of icing is buildup on protruding surfaces like skids and antenna. Sometimes from the pilot seat, it's hard to see those things. But skids, you can usually lean out and see some component of the skid or strut. The antenna, the windshield, the pitot tubes. You can, in some helicopters, you can see the pitot tube from the pilot seat. In a Robinson, you can't. So that's not a great indicator. Trim strings are a good one. They are flapping around out there all the time and don't have a lot of access to even your cabin heat or windshield demisting, defogging controls. So they will get sloppy and sometimes frozen. And then any unusual vibrations, main or tail rotor vibrations, could be a sign of imbalance in those rotor systems and potential ice buildup. And notice your increasing power demands. So anytime you pick up to a hover, your eye should go to that torque gauge or a manifold pressure gauge to see where you are at baseline. And in flight, you're constantly scanning gauges. We are taught in flight school, like lights are out, gauge is green. I'm doing a quick gauge check, we scan. But it's a good habit to start to look at exactly what the number is. Look at your engine temperatures and look at your manifold pressure and start to call out, if it helps you remember, what it is so that you know when it changes. And an increase in power demands that you can explain by climbing or adding more weight or whatever your situation is, that is an indicator that something else might be going on. Icing can really sneak up on you and add weight to the helicopter, which is going to translate to an increase in power demand. Turbine engine temperature is another one. Turbine engine temperature can increase when you have icing conditions around intake. So you'll see they're flying around. So when there is potential for ice, there's also a small dew point, temp and dew point spread. What does that mean? Likely development for fog. And fog doesn't have to be on the outside. I don't know if those of you who have flown in especially humid areas might see fog on the inside. And a foggy windshield is just as bad as being IFR. So if you are getting buildup with precipitation on the inside, condensation, then that can be a real problem. So I've made a habit of always carrying a microfiber cloth with me in my pocket so I can quickly grab it and wipe my windshield down on the inside. However, fog on the outside is also a hazard, and raising your awareness for those fog development areas of potential is really key. And if you can, make a pirate. If you are suspicious of icing conditions, you see icing conditions, you see fog, then talk to ACC and make a quick pirate. And it helps everybody else stay out of conditions that could be hazardous, both fixed wing and helicopter. So wind direction and speed kind of get into the meat of some of the mountain flying. Your awareness of wind direction and speed is really, really, really critical. And in particular with smaller helicopters like the Robinson series, you don't have a ton of indications. Like you might not have the advanced avionics that give you a wind indication on your GPS or on your readout. So you need to learn how to feel it and learn what the helicopter is telling you and why. And constantly be evaluating that. There are big picture prevailing winds in an area, why the runways are lined out the way that they are, but then there's local winds. And those local winds can change throughout the day, throughout the hour, especially when you're dealing with terrain and mountains. So as that ground starts to rise, the wind will follow with it, just like water. And that's called the windward side. As that ground comes back down again over the hill, if you will, the wind will fall with it, but it doesn't fall very smoothly. It will fall over the other side and get turbulent. That's called the leeward side. So the more rugged the terrain, if you have a really steep peak, the more turbulent the wind is going to be, especially on that leeward side. Air passing through really tight valleys and saddles is going to increase the Venturi effect that applies in any mountain environment. And as that wind funnels through the valleys and saddles, it will sometimes also rise and go up with the terrain, or it might just be like a tunnel going straight through that valley or saddle. So always being aware, reading those signs that you have either from the helicopter or from the environment, which we'll get to in a moment. So here's a visual depiction of the windward side and leeward side of a mountain range. And again, that will change with terrain. So rolling hills might not have quite as much turbulence on that backside, on that leeward side. But the leeward side is always going to be the more turbulent of the two. So the windward slopes are always going to have an updraft, and you can really use that to your advantage because you're going to have some element of positive power when you're on that side. So knowing where that side is and utilizing it is definitely to your advantage. Whereas the leeward side is going to be more turbulent, like I said, but it doesn't mean that you have to avoid it all the time. So understanding and learning how to read that terrain, it doesn't necessarily mean you can't go there. It doesn't mean that it's super dangerous. It's going to depend on the conditions that are changing every single day. And planning for those strong downdrafts that can occur on those leeward sides is pretty key, because if they are super turbulent and you don't account for it, they are strong enough to push you into that mountainside or create these rotor clouds on the backside that can carry you into a place that you don't want to be. So that's why it's really important. That line right in between the windward and leeward side is called the demarcation line. When we make mountain approaches, that demarcation line becomes more and more critical, understanding where it is. So windward meets leeward at that demarcation line, and it will steepen with increased wind velocity. When you have really strong winds coming over a hill, that demarcation line will start to get a little bit steeper as the wind velocity increases. If you have really mellow winds coming over, that leeward side's not going to be as turbulent, and the demarcation line starts to shallow. So knowing where that is, where that demarcation line lies, will help you then plan an approach into that ridgeline or mountaintop, because it'll allow you to stay into the wind and out of the leeward side, because you're essentially flying over the leeward side to stay into the wind. If you can visualize in this picture here, a helicopter coming in from right to left will need to stay out of the turbulent wind. Therefore, you have to be above the demarcation line to avoid those turbulent sides. If you're dealing with a valley, we just talked about the Venturi effect, then picking a side of the valley, ideally the windward side, so you take advantage of those updrafts. And you can feel that out in the helicopter sometimes by just power limitations. It's okay to experiment, especially if the winds aren't really strong. You can go to one side, see what it feels like. You might notice that you're getting free lift, or you're not using as much power to maintain straight and level flight. Go to the other side and see what it's like over there. You might notice that it's a little bit bumpy, or you might need more power. If you need more power, you're probably in a downdraft. So you can experiment and feel out those sides of the valley. Often that will be paired with the sun. So one side of the valley might have sun, the other side might be in the shade. The sunny side will often have convective activity that can also create an updraft and be a little bit more favorable to fly on that side. Either way, whatever side you pick, stay on a side, not in the middle of a valley, for a couple reasons. One, you're taking advantage of the wind, you're learning more about what the wind is telling you. But also, if you did need to make a turnaround 180 degrees, whether it's for IMC conditions or power limitations or navigation, whatever, you have that whole valley to work with. If you're flying in the middle, you just cut your distance, your turn radius in half. So if you pick a side, ideally the updrafting side, then you have a lot more room and a lot more freedom to maneuver if you did need to get around that area or get out of that valley. What are some of our options for wind in the mountains? So there's 4 or so, and I'll break them down in each slide individually. We have trees and birds, living environment. We have things that are laying on the ground like snow, dust, sand, clouds and water, and then using our instrumentation, feeling what the helicopter's doing and using those indicators like indicated airspeed and true airspeed, your power usage, your wind correction angle, that's a really good one, and finding an aiming point. If you're in straight and level flight, you have a good point that you can manage to maintain in your view, and start to notice if you're drifting away from that point, or if you need a little bit more pedal one side or the other to keep your track. And that will give you your wind correction angle and give you a strong wind indicator. And most of these are almost impossible at night. So in general, flying at night in the mountains is not recommended. Even if you have the proper training and the proper equipment like night vision goggles, these skills are still pretty hard. So I'd recommend avoiding night flying in the mountains. And if you do end up in that kind of situation, have the proper training already under your belt and MVGs with you. So living environment, we'll start with that one. Trees, around 15 knots, you'll start to see some of the moss if you live in an environment where you see that moss is hanging down from the trees, or some of the thinner branches and twigs will start to move. A little bit higher than that, 20, 25 knots, you'll see bigger branches start to move and sway, or maybe the whole tree. That gives you a rough baseline for wind speed. Birds, they like to be in smooth air too. They don't want to be in that turbulent crap on the leeward side. So they're going to stay on the windward side. And they're floating. You don't see them flapping their wings at all. Why? Because they're taking advantage of the wind, just like you should be. You can use those birds to better understand what's happening. They know that environment a lot better than you do. And they're always going to face into the wind, just like an aircraft does. If their wings are further out, stretched from their body, it means a little bit lighter wind because they're increasing surface area for lift reduction. And if their wings are super tight and close into their body, they're probably flying in slightly heavier wind. An exact number, I'm not sure. But I think the tree guideline is about the same, 10, 15 knots, 5 knots, something like that. They're going to have their wings a little more outstretched, and then heavier wind, 25, 30 or higher. You'll see them bring their wings a little bit closer. And here's some examples of what that might look like. trees in heavier wind, let's call it maybe 30 or 35, and then birds with outstretched, probably a little bit calmer wind. There's fog around. Fog doesn't often hang out in 40 knot winds, so probably an indicator that's a little bit lighter that day. Next one, snow and dust, dirt, or sand. What is the source of that snow and what is the surface that it's on? Those are two things you can ask yourself when you're looking at the surface. For example, snow, is it powder snow or is it ice? Has it been there for a long time, or did you just have a storm that you know dropped a light couple inches of powder? That will look a little wispy. It's going to start to kick up a lot sooner in a lighter wind than something like ice crystals or wind-packed slopes. It's been there for a while, and it's going to either take a heavy wind to pick up those crystals. It'll look a little bit different, or it might not pick it up at all. So if you don't see anything, like a wind-packed slope with no movement, that doesn't mean that the wind isn't there. It might mean that that layer of snow is so compacted that the wind can't pick it up. So things that you can look at if you're close enough to the terrain, especially if you have a background in snow, like skiing or avalanche education, then you might be able to pick that out from the air. But there's things to kick around in your brain as you're looking for those indicators. And here are some examples of what that might look like. So wind swept snow over a ridge, like that bottom left picture. And then this one in the middle here is the kind of terrain where there is a wind-packed layer of snow with just a small layer of grains that are being swept over it. You'll see that pretty commonly on wind-loaded slopes in the mountains. And then something like the bottom right one, where it's more wispy, so light powder that's being kicked up, and the wind is tossing it in that classic rotor cloud circle. So it's a good chance to understand what's happening, and I probably don't want to fly into that rotor cloud. It takes time sometimes to read these indications. You might do a couple of orbits, you might see if you're planning to land, but if you're just going through, you might maybe circle back and like, oh, I'm going to look at that again. I'm going to watch what's happening on this ridge line before I really commit myself to crossing that ridge line or picking a side to fly on. Clouds and water are really good. We learn about this stuff pretty early in our training about how to determine wind direction from these two. So the altitude layer with the cloud, lenticular clouds, for example, they will form on the top of a mountain summit. The lens-shaped cloud is pretty classic. And those are an indication of stronger winds that are aloft. And they will trend, generally speaking, towards the leeward side in stronger wind and at higher altitudes. You can almost always expect turbulence and downdrafts when you see lenticular clouds. Especially aloft. You can also see them over other clouds. There might be a more cumulus type cloud, and then right at the top of it, you see a lenticular. And that's a great indicator of a differing cloud layer. You have one layer that there's not a whole lot of wind happening, and then there's a layer on top of it. You can really only get lenticulars in higher wind conditions. That should be a yellow flag, let's call it. And for water surface, the waves and the amount of wind shadow is your primary indicator for wind strength and direction. Here's some pictures of lenticular in the middle, some classic mountain wave turbulence and rotor clouds associated with that on the left. And then this is a little island in the middle of a body of water. And on this little island, you can see the wind shadow on that right side. Wind in this case coming from the left, like top left corner, going towards the bottom right corner with that wind shadow. That wind shadow is pretty long, so I would call this maybe 20 knots or so if I were looking at that from the air. 20 knots from whatever direction that would be, top, in this case, top left of our photo. If that wind shadow was a little bit smaller, but I could still tell that it was there, then that might be more of a 10 knot or so wind. You start to develop an eye for it and have other indications. So, for example, if you just leave an airport, you know that it was 25 knots at the airport and you see this, well, okay, now you are developing your eye for what 20 or 25 knots looks like in this kind of a water situation. Instrumentation. How can we use our instrumentation on the helicopter to better determine or confirm what we think the winds are doing? Our indicated airspeed and our true airspeed, those things are different and they change with altitude. You'll probably get that question if you're a student pilot. You'll probably get that question on your oral exam with your examiner, because it's a commonly misunderstood concept. And then compare that with your ground speed. So you can fly a pattern, you can do this during a recon if you are looking to land, you can do it anytime, straight and level, doesn't matter. This is a great way to increase your wind awareness by using true airspeed, indicator speed, and compare it to ground speed. Your true airspeed increases 2% for every 1,000 feet of altitude that you climb. Unlike your indicated airspeed, which doesn't change. It's just on the gauge and it doesn't adjust with altitude. So you're comparing your true airspeed with your ground speed. That part is really important. If you're comparing your indicated on your gauge with your ground speed, you're not getting a proper indication unless you are literally right above sea level where they're going to be the same. But if you fly in the mountains, you're probably not at sea level. So learning how to calculate that. Some aircraft will have a true airspeed digital gauge on there. It'll calculate it for you, but you're always comparing your true airspeed with your ground speed, not indicated. And then power usage. If you have a downdraft, you're in a draft, like on that leeward side of a valley, you'll need more power to maintain your cruise. But you have to know what your cruise speed was to begin with. And that's what I was referring to before, where you're looking at your gauges, you're naming the particular numbers and knowing where you start so that when you go into a mountain environment, you have some sort of basis for comparison. So you'll see those power changes, but the power changes, noting a power change doesn't do you any good if you have no basis for comparison. The wind correction angle, a little bit more detail about that. You can try it from various points and angles. So we talked about that aiming point. If you have the time, then, or if you're out for a flight lesson, you can experiment with this a little bit. If you're cruising around from point A to point B, this is a great way to use that straight and level flight, is to practice different aiming points, see how they compare, and see what kind of control inputs you might need, like a little bit more left cyclic to maintain straight and level. Probably means you have a left crosswind. Or pedal control, right? Maintaining ball in the center. Notice how it's feeling and how your trim is, what your trim is telling you about your wind angle. And feeling it on the helicopter, it will want to vane into the wind. So sometimes, especially if we are in a little bit of turbulence, there's a tendency to lock up or get tight on the controls. The helicopter wants to be into the wind and it wants to find the path of least resistance. You lighten up on the controls and allow for that movement, it's going to tell you, it's going to give you some information about what it wants to do, and you can translate that into how the wind is pushing you around and how it's going to show up in the instruments, just like trim and heading in course, like we talked about a second ago. Crossing passes and ridge lines. So generally speaking, crossing a ridge at between a 20 and a 45 degree angle will give you good wind options and plenty of opportunities for egress. If something happens, you don't like it, you run into turbulence, whatever the case, it gives you a good option to bail. And staying 1,000 feet above the ridge, that's conservative, I would say. Also gives you some good escape options. Being a little bit lower than that is all right, depending on how strong your winds are and your confidence level in that particular area and for that particular situation. This is a fixed wing thing. For every 10 knots of wind, increase your altitude by about 1,000 feet when you're crossing ridge lines to give you a little more of a buffer if something does go wrong and you need to turn around. Given that helicopters are more maneuverable, that rule doesn't necessarily apply. This is a decent time to for questions. So anything that's burning, I can't see your people screen as well. So anything that is just that you're just dying to ask at the moment.
Hey, that was great. That was really informative, fun to listen to. Definitely put some things into perspective. I wanted to ask you about rotor clouds. We experience them on the front range, yeah. So when they're coming over the front range, or not rotor clouds, but just kind of like rotor wind, right? You may not see it necessarily, right? So how do you, and if you're flying horizontally through it or directly into it, would you have theoretically the updrafts and downdrafts as it's rotoring?
Yeah, you often will. Depends on the strength of the wind, but certainly in the bigger ranges, the area where I'm flying aeromedical is in Alamosa, Colorado, in the southern southwestern part of the state, and to go to the Front Range, Pueblo, Colorado Springs, Denver, where we're often taking people. I fly over the Sangre de Cristos,
Mm.
and it happens to be my favorite mountain range in Colorado, which is amazing. I get to fly over it every day. But it's also a 14,000-foot mountain range, and it creates some real interesting stuff. And I found that even if the rotor clouds aren't present, I do feel a bit of a mountain wave. So there's winds are predominantly out of the west, going into the pass that we usually fly, which I cross at about 10,000 feet. So there's peaks all around, and this is like a little cut in the mountain range. And on this side, the west side, it's pretty smooth. And then going through the pass will get a little bit turbulent. And on the back side, the leeward side, definitely turbulent, which again gets back to what I was saying. Doesn't necessarily mean you have to avoid the leeward side all the time. You can't a lot of the time because you have to traverse the mountain range. So in that case, we're in it, in the turbulence. I will avoid flying if there's indications like turbulent sigmet or really high winds, like start to question it about 35, 40 knots. It can get pretty nasty. And I do feel it. Like we go through that little section, I'll feel a big updraft, and then it's like riding a wave and coming back down again, a roller coaster. And then I feel that updraft and I feel the downdraft. And I just kind of let the helicopter do what it wants to do. If I put this helicopter happens to have autopilot, and I don't use it very much through the mountains because I find that it's constantly fighting the system because the system can't keep up with the changes that are happening in the helicopter. So I just let it kind of ride the wave and do its thing. And yeah, sometimes it can be a little bit scary, especially if there's other turbulent indicators out there. It's not just about wind conditions, but there's other elements of turbulence. Those are probably more scary moments. But if it's just wind, yeah, you can feel those waves because they're not really. I don't see rotor clouds, so those aren't present. But it does feel like a rotor, like a wave, kind of crazy. So yeah, does that answer your question? I feel like I got on a little bit of a tangent.
No, no, absolutely. Because I mean, I kind of have experienced that here on the Front Range, but I'm just curious. I was curious specifically how it kind of manifested in the mountains, like through big valleys, like South Park or something like that. That
Yeah,
makes sense.
yeah,
Hmm.
good example for sure.
I have another question, but if anybody wants to maybe chime in at any time, by all means, especially since we're on like turbulence and clouds, feel
Yeah.
free to jump in. I have a question about route planning. I was looking at flying to Durango, not in a helicopter but in an airplane, and there's when you do your flight planning, there's routes that are suggested in ForeFlight. How often do you use those predetermined those flight routes, or how do you or do you have a specific route when you're coming to the Front Range, and does weather dictate which way you go? And just kind of curious how you manage that.
All the above.
Nice.
I don't typically use the predetermined routes. I might reference that if I'm unfamiliar with the area, but most of the time, weather is predominant for route planning, and outside of that, terrain comes second. And then, of course, fuel and performance, and there's so many other components of flight planning, but I'd say those are the two top ones, weather and terrain. Um, and terrain can be dictated by performance. So, what helicopter am I in? Can it handle going straight over a peak? Can I use a mountain ridge to climb up and gain some free lift and extra updrafts? Or am I limited by altitude and I need to go as low as possible through a mountain pass because I don't have the performance to go up high? So, a lot of components that go into that. I'd say more often than not, I will look at a route point A to point B, and then start to pick through. If, like, let's assume that weather's green, good to go, don't have to worry about it. Then I'll start to pick through the terrain. Where are my low points? Where are my potentials for diversion? Or if I get into trouble, are there roads around? Are there places that I could live, or do I want that security of having a road or resources nearby? And actually, the example that I have coming up for navigation and that personal story I was telling you about goes into that a little bit. So let me keep going. And if you have other questions at the end of that section, ask me again, because I
Yeah.
think some of them might be answered during that section.
Sounds good. I'm going to reshare your presentation then.
Cool.
Got it.
Okay. Should be on the weather conditions with a couple of pictures.
Yep, exactly.
All right. So because the weather and winds can change anytime in the mountains, you can get trapped. And if there is potential with with a low temp dew point spread, and you know that there's potential for fog development, then that should raise your red flag and have extra keen awareness about where you're going and what your options are to get out of there. One valley is not going to look the same as the next valley because of this extremely dynamic environment. So make sure that you have multiple routes, multiple options, which kind of calls back to the question that was just asked about route planning. I would be more inclined to fly, if I had the performance, I might fly a little bit higher if it gave me better options to bail to the next valley or to have a road option versus trapping myself in one place. Like, I have to fly this pass because it's the lowest thing and that's my only option. I never like, as soon as I hear myself say, well, that's my only option, ooh, that's a definite red flag and should be for you too. I don't like having only one way out. Always try to keep those options open, have some other way to get back to where you came from or to get to where you're going. So we'll move on to some crew and more physiological aspects of mountain flying. Spatial disorientation is a huge one. When you're surrounded by high mountains, you don't have a horizon anymore. We're very accustomed to pairing our maneuvers with the compass on the horizon or the tip path plane on the horizon, but you don't really have a horizon anymore. So it's hard to gauge your distances. It's hard to keep that reference, very similar to instrument flying, because you're losing those references. And if you aren't familiar with or experienced in the mountain environment, it'll take a little bit of time to calibrate your senses to figure out those distances. How long is it going to take you from point A to point B? How close is my rotor disc to that mountainside? And where's my tail? You know, if I'm turning in a tight area, is there a risk of hitting my tail on something? It takes a while to build calibrate is the best word I can come up with, but to really build that sight picture of how you fit into this relatively new environment. And then, of course, anything else that you're encountering, like low visibility, whether it be from smoke, certainly applicable in the last weeks of being in Colorado, or precipitation, fog, any of those things, turbulence, can increase the risk of spatial disorientation because it's distracting you from just the navigation, which is challenging enough. We're adding getting bumpy, we're adding low visibility. That is task saturation in progress. So keeping your awareness high about that. High altitude hypoxia is a big deal too. Not all mountain flying is at high altitude. Alaska is a really good example of that. You can have huge peaks, very similar to what we have here in the Rockies, but they're only going to go to 6,000 or 7,000 feet. They just happen to come from sea level. So the relief is the same. It's still a 7,000 foot gain, but you're starting from sea level and going to 7 rather than here in Colorado. Our field elevation here is 7,500 and we're going up to 14,000. So the relief is identical, but it doesn't have to be high altitude. You can still be in the mountains and not be high altitude. The higher you go and the longer you stay there will have a cumulative effect on your ability to think and remember, make decisions, and respond with basic motor skills. And severe impairment, especially if you aren't raised at altitude or live at altitude and you happen to have gone there, you're not accustomed, you're from sea level, you're doing a cross-country ferry for someone in a high altitude environment, then that those symptoms of hypoxia can occur pretty low, 7, 8, 9, 10,000 feet. If you spend a lot of time at altitude, or you're particularly athletic, you have a high cardiovascular fitness, and your ability to handle a hypoxic condition might be a little bit higher, a little bit better than most. And then the hypoxic symptoms will change with density altitude. Our performance in our body changes just like aircraft performance changes with density altitude. So temperature does make a difference there. If you happen to fly above 10,000 feet MSL in an unpressurized cabin, hypoxia can really make a difference in your eyesight. Again, flying in the mountains at night, not recommended, but it's even further exacerbated with night because you are losing depth perception, your ability to focus, and you lose the ability to keep your periphery, and that exponentially increases. If you happen to have a pilot oxygen system, there are several affordable ones out there, but especially for fixed wing and you're spending time at altitude, then getting a pilot oxygen system is not a bad idea. In the helicopter environment, we don't really spend enough time in those higher altitudes to justify the weight of a pilot oxygen system, but like in air medical, we have to have it for Part 135 operations. Your oxygen limitations change. They're a little more conservative than they are in the Part 91 environment. So 10,000 feet or higher for more than 30 minutes, I have to have oxygen. So we have them on board, but pretty uncommon for most helicopters. Here's some examples of pilot oxygen systems. If this is something that you want to look into as a fixed wing pilot, just screenshot this or look on Sporties. They had a really great article about some different oxygen systems that are available. Some other issues with high altitude and mountain flying, dehydration is a huge one. Dehydration is the most common reason that people, especially people who are older, go to the hospital. It's a very simple, very preventable illness, but it's extremely common and it's pretty hard to pick out because it looks like other things too. So I would recommend watching for symptoms all the time. Decreased mental capacity, slow reaction times, circulatory issues. If you have like thermoregulatory problems, that can sometimes be a dehydration thing because your blood is super thick and it's not able to carry the oxygen and the liquids that you need. And also dizziness or vertigo are all symptoms of dehydration, which also happen to be symptoms of acute mountain sickness, AMS, or sometimes even hypoxia. So AMS is a little more along the lines of prolonged exposure, like if you're stuck somewhere at altitude or you're climbing a mountain, you're climbing a 14er or something like that, and you're there for hours and hours. But it can occur at any time. And in particular, if you, like I mentioned before, are coming from lower elevations, going to high altitude, then AMS is something that might happen pretty quickly because your body's not accustomed to dealing with the thinner air. Unfortunately, these issues can look like each other. So again, increasing awareness and noting when symptoms start, what it looks like, what you ate and drank throughout the day, and being able to pick apart what the symptoms could mean for you can make a difference in how you treat them. Some potential for visual illusions, lack of horizon, like we talked about before in the mountain environment, is very common in mountain terrain, and it can make it pretty hard for you to distinguish between level flight or being slightly in a turn because you're missing that horizon. And ground from the sky, low visibility, or if you have a cloud situation where there's clouds that are resting on top of a mountain or on top of a ridgeline, and sometimes it's hard to tell if that's on top of a layer of snow. You might not be able to distinguish the ground from the sky as easily as you would otherwise. Flat light is another big hazard, especially in the snow environment. I'd say most common in snow. Overcast clouds with snow below you becomes really, really, really hard to judge what your depth is, how far away you are from things, or any variations in terrain. And then being confined in a valley can cause proximity miscalculations. it's hard to develop that, like I talked about before, with calibrating your distances. And when you're in a really tight valley, you may not always know how big that turn radius needs to be to get out that valley if you did need to retreat, which is why it's so important to stay on one side and build yourself as much space as you can to be able to turn around and stack the odds in your favor in that sense. Give yourself the most space that you possibly can. Night flight, we already talked about this, not recommended except in the case of highly trained crew under MVGs. And even then, we use extreme caution. It's always on a risk management thing that I have to, like a risk assessment form I have to do for every single flight. If it's a night flight, and especially if it's an unaided night flight, which would be like a simple reposition from here at the hangar over to the hospital helipad, it's literally a 3-minute flight. I might do that without MVGs because I have the city lights below me. But even then, I have to click a separate box on my risk assessment form because of the increased risk of flying at night, even with the MVGs. Certainly increased pilot and crew workload and fatigue with or without MVGs, doesn't matter. You're going to get more tired when you're flying at night. And decreased detail and depth perception at night, especially because of that lack of ground reference or low ground reference. So Robinson helicopters are a good example. You have to have outside illumination, ground reference, or some sort of celestial illumination like moon or stars to be able to tell what the ground is doing and how far you are away. There's a reason for that. Why? A lot of people have killed themselves trying to fly around at night and they lose their ground reference and they can't tell the terrain from the sky anymore. Your reduced peripheral field of vision is pretty huge. It's easy to get tunnel vision at night and forget about the stuff that's around you. And if you have stuff around you, like mountain terrain, then your risk goes up, of course. There is also potential for something like snow on top of the peak in the distance to look like a cloud. That's happened to me. It's pretty scary. Navigation. So while flying over flat land, we can put in on ForeFlight, point A to point B. They're going to draw this nice little line. And that can be okay because there's nothing to hit. You might have, some wires and some antennas and things because you are a diligent, safe pilot that has thoroughly looked at all of your resources and studied your charts. So yeah, there's some threats along the route, but for the most part, when you're in flat land, if you're flying at 1,000 feet, you're probably not going to hit anything. Not so much in the mountains because there are so many other things to hit, and following that pink line can get you into some serious trouble. Having flexibility is really, really important. A good moniker for mountain flying is to go as high as necessary, but as low as possible. Why do I say that? As high as necessary, obviously you want to have clearance from terrain. As low as possible, because you want to take advantage of some of those winds, like the updrafts of a valley, or if you are approaching a pass or a saddle that you're trying to cross. If you use a ridge line, you can climb that ridge line, gain altitude with it, free lift because you're going to have updrafts on either side over the demarcation line, staying above that demarcation line. You can utilize those winds to gain altitude to be able to get over your pass. So if you weren't low and close to the terrain, you wouldn't be able to take advantage of those winds. Figure out what the winds are doing and figure out how to use it to your advantage. And that's a really good example of that. So that's why low as possible is a good moniker, but high is necessary because you also want to clear whatever you're trying to fly over. And then lastly, considering the impacts that your navigation planning will have on fuel burn. So flying the pink line, ForeFlight, so great. It's going to calculate your headwind and your tailwind, your fuel burn, how long it's going to take you, how far away it is. So nice. We can look at that log, have it all figured out. Or you can do it manually like good little pilots. You should do that every once in a while for practice. But in the mountains, that's not realistic because we can't fly the pink line. And that will change all those calculations. And ForeFlight can do that to some degree, right? You can put in little intermediate points and add it to the route, and you can make adjustments there, and it'll still spit out some pretty good numbers for you. But you have to know to do that in the first place. And that goes back to the route planning, right? I'm looking at terrain, I'm looking at performance, I'm looking at weather, and then I'm choosing which of those little waypoints to add so I can get the best picture of my overall fuel burn and my wind conditions. So here's that example I was talking about from my personal experience. This is a long cross country all the way across Alaska. This is a big zoomed out picture of Alaska. So starting from Alpine way up north by the Arctic Ocean. And my intention was to go that day all the way to Anchorage on the southern part of the state there. It was, I think I burned almost 8 hours on the collective hops meter. It took me almost 12 hours. So where I was stopping, this is my first fuel stop, was in this little town called Coldfoot, which is below a mountain range. And I was watching the weather for several days. The North Slope of Alaska is known to have some pretty dicefall weather that changes a lot. So I'd been watching it. I picked the best window of opportunity for me to leave because a multi-day storm was moving into the area. So I had like a 40-hour window or so where the weather looked pretty good and I felt like I could make it with some options if I needed to stop and wait something out. So during this ferry, this is an extremely remote region of our country. Extremely. There is nothing out there. So I knew that communication was limited. I wasn't going to have cell service. There's no lodging. There's no fuel. There's no airports. There's nothing up there, especially above that little mountain range, the Brooks Range. Here's a zoomed in version of that. So this is just the section from Alpine up north down to Coldfoot at the end. And you'll see a division there. I'll get into that in a second. There is one place to add fuel before crossing this mountain range. And you'll see that just below the yellow box, this is 50% fuel. So that place is a landing area. It's not even a landing strip, really, where there was cached fuel, which happens a lot in remote Alaska. People will just drop 50-gallon drums of Jet A in the middle of nowhere to offer an emergency option. One of those drums is at this 50% fuel place. It's called Umiat. And there's a decent chance that it's not available. It has water in it. It has debris. I do have a remote, this particular mission, I did have a remote fuel pump and a hose with me, so I can put it in this drum. I can test it for water. Like I have some ways to make sure the fuel is safe, but there's no guarantee that it's there. What if somebody else came to use it and there isn't the fuel that I need? So I gave it about a 50-50 shot. I could go there and top off because I knew that my fuel was limited getting down to Coldfoot. But if I went there and it wasn't available, then I was screwed. I'd pretty much have to go back to my starting point, to Alpine, because I definitely wouldn't have enough to continue. So I decided not to go to that fuel stop because I was fairly confident that I had enough to get to where I was going. But there were some issues with weather, and I knew I was going to be tight on fuel. So you'll see where those two purple lines diverge, an en-route decision point. If you are unfamiliar with EDPs, I would get familiar with them. They're very helpful in flight planning. And in this case, I made that EDP because I knew I'd have a choice to go over a higher mountain pass, which is more direct to get to where I was going. Coldfoot was my fuel option. The left line was a lower mountain pass, but much longer to get to my other fuel place, a town called Bettles. So I made that EDP because it was the furthest point away where I wasn't going to be diverting to be able to make that decision, go right or left. It was far enough away, and I knew I'd have enough fuel to be able to turn around there and go back to my starting point. So I made that EDP in that area for that reason. And my other issue was with weather. There were some clouds, and not low visibility wasn't a huge issue, but it was mostly cloud layers, a little bit of potential for fog, and some low cloud layers that moved in over the Brooks Range. I really wanted to go direct over that higher elevation pass. I definitely had the performance for it, but I was concerned about the weather situation. This is the first time I'd been in this range, so I didn't really know how the weather behaved in this range given that I was a little unfamiliar, it heightened the risk for sure. It was like, okay, little yellow flag, I'm not that familiar. So because the higher cloud ceiling was required to reach Coldfoot, I was worried about it. The other pass, I for sure had the cloud clearance to be able to do it. So again, having those options available to me. I knew that fuel would be tight if I went for the lower elevation pass. And the other kicker is I would have to go to that alternate fuel, the Bettles fuel, and then backtrack because I had to go to Coldfoot to drop off some gear. So that added just a little element of pressure. We talk a lot about pressure, external pressures. In this case, it was self-induced. I didn't want to have to backtrack because I had a long day ahead of me, right? But it was a factor. And I acknowledged that was a factor. I had a little bit of pressure there encouraging me to take the shorter route. And I didn't have enough fuel for sure to try the higher pass and then be like, oops, nope, I don't like this weather situation. I'm going to turn around and take the lower one. Definitely didn't have enough fuel for that. So the difference here is between those two routes is 20 miles. Now, also on this pink line here in the middle, that direct pink line that ForeFlight spit out for me was 120 miles. So really the difference between what ForeFlight gave me and my ideal route was 20 miles. The difference between what ForeFlight gave me and the route I actually flew, the lower elevation pass, was 40 miles. That's huge. That's a huge, huge difference. And here's some basic numbers. I happen to be in an A-star, and so I just spit out a few options. It's actually not that different, the fuel burn and times here, as what you'd be in an R-44 or most other helicopters. So even though they carry more fuel, they also burn more fuel. So your times aren't all that different. And 15, 20 minutes in a helicopter, that's your VFR fuel reserve requirement by FAA law. So it doesn't mean that you can't dip into that, right? I didn't break any laws by landing without my fuel reserve. In terms of flight planning, you have to that built in to your plan. Sorry, just a second. That's duty phone. They're trying to send me out on flight. Hold on just a second. Okay, nope, it's all good. This was in not quite calm, but less than 10 knots winds. So if I did have something else in addition to my particular fuel calculations, like a headwind, I could have definitely gotten into some more serious trouble. What was my backup plan, you might be asking, because I said that I always wanted an out. Well, from that EDP, when I decided to go that lower elevation pass, I had plenty of options to land there, and I knew that. It was a really big, broad, wide pass. So even though I was fairly committed to flying that route and getting to my fuel place, and there weren't places I could get fuel along the way between that EDP and Bettles, I did have a ton of places where I could set the helicopter down and get help, because the place where I was taking gear, Coldfoot, is another one of the bases this company was operating out of, and a phone call would have gotten me help from that base. So somebody else could have come and brought me the fuel that I needed, or I would have had some resources when I got that far towards Coldfoot. So the bottom line here is, if I had flown the pink line, I definitely wouldn't have been able to because of weather, first of all. And if I had just planned my fuel around the pink line, I would have run out because I didn't account for the 40 miles of diversion going through the mountains. So that's a navigation example, and I feel like it's a pretty poignant one for mountain flying and for flight planning. I'm going to breeze through the last little bit here of backcountry prep, and then we can circle back to any questions that you have, because I know we're getting along just after an hour here, so I want to be respectful of your time as well. So in terms of backcountry prep, as discussed in the navigation section, because mountain flying is so indirect, it can require more fuel, and you should never, ever, ever, ever pass up a fuel stop. No matter what, just don't pass up a fuel stop if you're doing long cross countries in the mountains. Something that goes overlooked a lot in flight planning is communication. If you're in a remote environment, if you're at higher altitudes, you may not have the communication resources that you normally have with cell phone and with radio. It's easy to say, well, I get into trouble, I fly into IMC, I can just call, whoever center. I call Denver Center and get help. Well, they're not going to be able to talk to you because you are far away and tucked into terrain. There's no way you're going to be able to get radio reception to help. That's far away. Maybe a closer resource, but if you're in a remote environment, you might not have a closer resource for ATC help. So knowing that and understanding your area, what options are around, and having some sort of backup for communication. I would definitely recommend a satellite communication device. I personally use a Garmin Messenger, which is a pretty small in-reach type device. It's like half the size of a cell phone, maybe a little bit less with the big cell phones these days. And considering all of those choices when you are making your planning and communication plans. Excuse me. So the other component is what is on your helicopter. What is your helicopter equipped with already? If you are planning to land somewhere, do you have equipment like bear paws that you need for snow? And can those or any equipment that you have mounted externally impact your fuel burn in terms of drag? If you do have things like that mounted on the helicopter that you're flying or a helicopter that you're ferrying, it's a pretty common pilot scenario. If you are hired by a private owner to ferry a helicopter you're unfamiliar with, look at what is on there and is it going to affect your fuel burn or your drag? They should have a supplement section in the flight manual or the POH for anything that's attached to the helicopter. Sometimes your limitations and your emergency procedures are different with equipment mounted on externally. So always reference that supplement section because it sometimes changes, like airspeed limitations, for example, in an auto rotation can change with equipment that's mounted on the outside of the helicopter. Land and live, it's a big one, huge proponent. You can always land and live, wait for better conditions to fly. However, sometimes you can't. So proper flight planning is really important because there are situations I love this moniker and you're in a helicopter, use its capabilities. There are situations where it might be a bit hard, like say a dense forest or a really densely populated urban area where it's kind of inconvenient to land. So let's try to avoid getting into that situation to begin with. Survival gear, critical for any remote environment, and especially for mountains. Satellite communication device, we talked about that. First aid kit, shelter, fire starter, all the things on the list here. Some sort of water, way to acquire food and water. And I think I give you a link in a second. So there's a great resource for kind of grab and go type survival gear and first aid kit. Those are great to have. ELTs, not required for most helicopter operations, but they are recommended and they can either transmit manually or automatically. If it's automatic, it's triggered by a G-force sensor and transmits a signal on guard 121.5 that ATC monitors. And then the SAR teams that are local to your area can get those coordinates from ATC to go find you. And of course, be sure to follow the FAA requirements around ELTs if you do have one, testing and maintenance. Where do you keep your survival gear? There have been cases where a plane or helicopter crashes and all the pilots did all the right thing, crew did all the right things. They have survival gear on board and it happens to get crushed, or the door that it's stored in, the compartment it's stored in can't open and it's inaccessible. Or in worst case scenarios, not on board at all. And the crash is survivable, but the people didn't have what they needed and they died of exposure or hypothermia or whatever. A pretty easy mistake to avoid. So where do you keep your stuff? What if you can't access those survival kit items? What should be on your person? My personal kit is listed right there on that first bullet point. Those are the things that I keep with me. In this job, I fly with a chest harness. And I have all those things with me right there in the chest harness. If you have pockets, you could fill pockets or a flight suit or things that are literally on your person in your pockets, whether it be a jacket or whatever you're wearing. I would recommend at least a few of those things. Communication at the very least. The magnesium fire starters are pretty awesome. There are some other really great fire starters out there. Dryer lint is a good one, or cotton ball with Vaseline in it. The downside to that is you have to have a lighter. So when I'm thinking about what I carry on my person, I don't necessarily want an explosive device in my pocket along with my cotton ball with Vaseline. So I choose the magnesium fire starters instead because they aren't combustible until you have to do the shavings and light them. And then a very minimalist first aid kit. So when I go into the backcountry and I'm a rock climber, so when I'm going on a long rock climb, this is the basic stuff that I take for my first aid kit. Something for wound closure, tourniquet for major bleeds, a gauze roll of tape or maybe an ace bandage, and then some basic consumables, painkillers, Benadryl, that kind of thing. So basic first aid kit options. For flying over water, a lot of good skills training there. Underwater e-guest training is highly recommended. There are some links there if that's something you're interested in. You should screenshot this. And by far the most important piece of gear is your brain. Knowledge is power. Knowing how to use it. Your equipment doesn't do you any good if you don't know how to use it. So last, whether high altitude or not, mountain flying can be extremely fatiguing and extremely dangerous. However, one of my favorite quotes. Superior pilot uses superior judgment and planning to avoid situations which require the use of their superior skill. That is the end of my presentation. I have a few cool pictures that I'll just kind of scroll through here, but happy to answer questions, especially circle back to that navigation one and make sure that your question got answered.
Jessica, this is Michael Triana here. Pleasure to meet you, and a fantastic presentation on mountain flying. I've spent a lot of time in my career in the Army, flying in and around mountains from El Paso to Afghanistan to Korea, and everything that you were putting down there is almost a carbon copy of what we practice for mountain flying in the Army, and it's interesting to see how much.
Oh no.
Oh, I lost you.
Military and civil aviation in this matter. So yeah, fantastic presentation. Oh, we good again?
Awesome.
But
Appreciate the feedback.
a fantastic presentation there. Talking about like route planning and everything there. Like escape routes are another big one that we often talk about in the military. Not only do we have to worry about winds and weather, but we also have to worry about enemy contact. So we typically fly along the upper edge of any ridge line, the military crest, typically the upper third, and that typically gives us a lot of options of popping up and over a ridge line or sliding over to the other side of the valley. Gives us a lot of maneuverability. It's interesting to see how the crossing techniques that you described are even the same that we would utilize as well.
Excellent. Yeah, I'm glad to hear there's some continuity there. That does make a big difference. And using those ridge lines, like that's a really great. I should just add a slide just about that, honestly, because it's probably a technique that I use most often, more than most others. Is using the updrafts that are coming onto a ridge line and being able to climb and get more lift than I would have otherwise if I didn't have that benefit of the wind. Like I would have had to use a lot more power or maybe circle if I'm trying to climb and gain altitude. I would maybe have to orbit in place in order to gain that altitude versus being able to ride that ridge line and let the winds push me up in order to clear that next bit of terrain or get through the saddle or whatever it is. Yeah, so that's awesome. I really appreciate the feedback.
Absolutely, and like what you're saying about utilizing the updrafts there, that saves you gas. We we say never pass gas as far as never passing up a fuel stop. But even on the difference of 40 miles there that you were talking about in your example, if you'd been flying on the opposite side of the valley, fighting against those downdrafts, that'll increase your fuel burn and shorten the distance that you can travel. So yeah, always use the most efficient mode of flight. Love to hear it.
Awesome. Can I steal your never pass gas line?
Absolutely.
Thanks. What else? Hey. Yeah.
Really good.
Yeah.
I was captivated, frankly. It makes me really want to get up there and experience this because I love flight planning and.
Hold on, Jen.
Yeah.
We had Mick. I think there's a little bit of a lag there. He was speaking.
Oh yeah, he's on mute. Let me unmute him. I might have muted him. There you go, Mick Galloway. Yeah, get back on it, buddy.
Yeah. No, it's just awesome. I'm in concert with both John and I can't remember the last gentleman that spoke, but yeah, good stuff, Jess. Really like it. I'm currently in the Black Hills flying, and it's a huge education once you get into the mountains in a helicopter. It's wild. But I had a couple questions on in regard to when it comes to like your ridge lines and approaching a ridge line. How much of approach to the ridge line do you determine a turn away, understanding the wind? Because there's times where in the Black Hills where we'll fly that near the highest peak and the wind direction, if we're turning away from it, we'll turn so that we're not putting the underside of the rotor disc into that intensified wind. Got to minimize, potential of, because it's so wild how quickly an overspeed can occur in the mountains.
Yeah, it really is. What are you flying 44s there?
We're flying 44s, 66s, 206, sometimes 407.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
Mostly it's Bravos and Pro. Yeah.
Yeah, makes that's Mark Shafley, right?
What's that? No, I'm not flying for Shafley. I'm flying for Andrew Bussey, Black Hills Helicopters.
Oh, I gotcha. Okay, super. Yeah, that makes sense. Rephrase your question. I want to make sure I understand.
Just curious, when you approach a ridgeline and there is a little bit of an increase in wind, do you modify your approach to that ridgeline in case you need to turn back? Understanding the direction of your turn just trying to keep things safe in the helicopter. Safe.
Yeah, so crossing a ridgeline, like you're going perpendicular to it?
Yeah. Not perpendicular. No. No, give you an example. If I'm approaching from the north side of Black Elk Peak and I got a southwest wind, it's going to accelerate around and over. And, flying out there, we do a traditional route where we'll turn and do a right turn to avoid exposing the underside with a left turn for that intensified wind. Just to limit that desire to overspeed with that, intensified air into the rotor disc. We'd rather have it go through the top because we have downsloping terrain away from us with that right-hand turn.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But some people want to do a left-hand turn because of potential for increased left pedal needed in a right-hand turn.
Yeah, I can see the debates.
I was just curious if you had any. I mean, I know that's digging into the minutia of it all, but I was just curious about that.
I think you're on the right track in terms of turning into the wind, essentially, right? You're trying to keep the disc in a more positive profile to generate lift. So you're basically turning. So
not into it. We're turning away from it because turning into it and exposing the underside of that disc to intensified winds. Because from what I understand, you might be able to correct me, that to get over the barrier of terrain, that wind can double in speed because it's just a giant venturi it's having to navigate through the air mass.
Right.
So if turning into the wind exposes the underside, we've had some strong potentials for overspeed. So you turn
with it
away from the wind direction and allow a little, if you have the terrain to allow a little bit of descent. And once you're completed with that turn, you're good, and you just are flying with a tailwind.
Yeah, that tracks. Yeah, I'd say that's pretty sound ideals if you're concerned about overspeed. If you don't have that concern, like 206s, from my understanding, I don't have a lot of Bell experience, but they are pretty prone to turbine lag. And I do have some 66 ton, which is also prone to turbine lag, and 44s are certainly prone to overspeed. So I think in any airframe where that's a higher concern, that is a very sound way to approach a ridgeline, and being mindful of what the winds are doing and how they can kick your ass.
Yeah, they really can.
Yeah, it's scary. And I think what you said about keeping trim, or being also very mindful about what your pedals are doing, how much pedal you're going to need. If you are power limited or near the aircraft's limitations, then adding whatever your power pedal is in a Robinson product left pedal is going to demand higher power output, which could then put you in a whole cascading effect, of potential overspeed or potential low RPM condition. If you need more power pedal and you don't have it, then that could, and has, in my experience in a 44, has happened a few times, where all it takes is a little bit of left pedal and you get the lower RPM, and you're like, what? No, I thought it was fine. Well, no, because your aircraft also has an anticipator, and when you apply pedal, there's a little calculation that will happen in there. It definitely happens in the A-Star, where it sends that anticipation of needed power forward in the system, and it'll give that to you. But you're also, if you're right at the limitation, it could be enough to kick it over into an exceedance of some sort. So there's high potential for all of that. And so being mindful of trim and thinking, being ahead of the aircraft and thinking ahead of what I'm going to need. So if I make this turn, what pedal am I going to need? And do I have that margin to account for whatever the power pedal is for you? So yeah, those are all really, really good points, and it sounds like sound flying practice for what you're doing.
It's wild. And then lastly, real quick, go ahead. Sorry, man.
Yeah, I was just curious as to what altitudes you're flying at when you're trying to cross these ridge lines, because that's what we're talking about, right? Crossing a ridge line as opposed to approaching it and landing on it, right?
Correct. We're about 7,300 feet.
Okay. So thinking of about mechanical turbulence around mountains and everything like that. Jess was talking a bit about like the demarcation line there, and kind of pulling from my experience from having done pinnacle landings on mountains. Above a certain point, the mechanical turbulence that's coming off of the mountain, of the wind blowing over it, will decrease with altitude. So if you're flying close to that ridge line and you're worried about the winds overspeeding your rotor system, if you've got the altitude and power available, you may just try crossing that ridge line at a higher altitude. And you can kind of feel it out too, as what Jess was saying with the winds. As you're working in and around those ridge lines, you'll feel the aircraft either want more power or less, and it may just be a matter of trying to fly a little bit higher at that 40, 45 or 20 degrees and kind of working in, feeling it, and then if it's not good, since you're not trying to cross it head on, you've left yourself plenty of escape room to go back into the valley or the other side of the ridge line that you knew was safe, or safe conditions for your helicopter.
Roger. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I totally agree. And the scenario I gave you is just a standard tour route that we don't necessarily cross the ridge. There's times where we will, and of course, yeah, higher is better, but we'll turn around. And that turning around and away from it is done in a right turn. It puts the terrain off to the left and is in a right turn and prevents that. Since we're not crossing the ridge, it prevents it. Sometimes flying lower is even better. You can kind of hide under it. But yeah, I was just curious in that approach because sometimes it's all, you just got to do a weather assessment. You get, a shear layer at a higher altitude, you want to stay under it regardless. And you may have to deal with a little intensity of wind or decide just not to fly based off of that intensity. But just understanding what you're going to get as you, approach it is, it's one thing that has been a huge learning education for me, is deciding and knowing as much as you can what that wind's doing, how strong it is, where it's going to be turbulent, if you even want to fly there, and if you do, how you're going to approach it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And leaving yourself a wide buffer, a wide margin, especially if you're new to mountain flying or you're just feeling things out. Leaving yourself plenty of power margin, plenty of altitude margin, plenty of wind margin. Your first couple flights in the mountains shouldn't be in winds that are 20 knots. I think operate in the single to low double digits, like below 20, somewhere in the teens. A little bit of wind is good because you are trying to learn about what they're doing. So calm day isn't awesome either. So it won't give as much opportunity for you to learn. However, don't mess around with winds that are high unless you have a little bit of experience under your belt, and then you can start building on that experience. I've gotten my butt kicked more than once because there was some unforecasted stuff that came up, and that involved turning around, trying a different way. Sometimes finding a different route that's a little bit less turbulent. So yeah, I would play it conservative until you gain a little bit of experience with an instructor, ideally.
I'm just curious on your approach to ridge lines. Altitude's everything, really. Just like it was mentioned, just fly higher and you'll get a lessened intensity of it. John, thank you for your patience, brother. What did you have to say?
No, that's great. That's I'd crossed a few ridges in the mountains in the Blue Ridge area, and we approached it very similar to what you guys are talking about, and that was an outstanding experience. And it's fun to be able to relate what you guys are doing on a regular to the one experience I had, and just kind of piece the puzzle together. But no, I wanted to reflect, Jessica, that I think a lot of us, we're kind of thrill seeker people, but I was really I'm thinking about. I like being in scenarios where I have to have a survival kit, and with this like long distance flight in the backcountry of Alaska, and you have your survival kit with you. I mean, that seems like such a great experience. Like once in a lifetime for a lot of people. Okay, so I had a question regarding the 3D view in ForeFlight, right? And so a lot of this might be a little amateur question, but does this come into play where you can track your route through the mountains and you're looking at the passes and what mountains you can fly over and kind of using ForeFlight to aid in that? Is that something that you see or use?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, show me that screen again that you had up a second ago.
Yeah. So it'll I'm just gonna play it.
Profile view, right?
It's the 3D view, but it'll fly your route for you through passes. Mm-hmm. I mean, you can kind of speed it up, but let me see. But it'll take you over the mountains and take
Definitely.
take you to
tool.
waypoints, right, that are established already. I'm curious how often that is used, especially in somewhere like the backcountry of Alaska.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely valuable tool. And I forget what level of ForeFlight that comes with as an option. It might be one of the higher options.
Yeah.
If you don't have something like that, then Google Earth is an awesome resource for flight planning. You can do the same thing. You're going to, even for an off-airport landing, just in the training environment, you can go check out and pre-fly an off-airport landing and look at all the wires and crane and antennas and whatever else is around. It's really amazing. So some sort of 3D planning software is a very useful tool. And if you do have access to it, then I would recommend working that into your flight planning.
One comment on Google Earth versus Google Maps. We talked about this during one of Triana's presentations, that Google Earth the resolution is considerably higher than Google Maps. So those of you that are using maps for 3D resolution, switch over to Google Earth. It's considerably better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thanks for bringing that up. That's true. It is considerably better. Awesome. I need to wrap it up, you guys. I have a mechanic here who's waiting for me to help with a engine wash. So I am going to call it a night. I really appreciate you all being here and your thoughtful questions and participation. If you ever have more questions or feedback, you could absolutely contact me. I'm going to put my email here in the group thing, so you always have it. Feel free to reach out anytime. One thing that's great about groups like this, and kudos to John for getting it started in the first place, it seems like there's been some awesome participation from everyone, and you use me as a resource. And I say that all the time, and then people don't. So I'm not kidding. Reach out anytime with any questions. I've worked in tours and utility and now HAA, and have a pretty broad perspective about the industry, even though I haven't been flying all that long. But I've done a lot of things mainly because I'm ADD and I get bored easily. So pretty like the picture view, and I would love to help you. Really use me as a resource. I'm serious about that.
Thanks so much for being here. Thrilled you're part of the group. Certainly, I'll be reaching out and asking questions in the future. Direct message by all means. Yeah, thank you. This is awesome. Great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my pleasure. I'm happy to do other presentations in the future too.
Thank you, Jessica.
Yeah, you bet.
Thank you. Yes, that was fantastic.
Good. Great to see everybody.
All right, go say some lives.
Right.
Did you work with Brett Ingles at Alpine, Jess?
No, I don't think I did. The name is familiar, but I don't think we worked together.
Yeah, he was up there on the North Slope for a while.
Oh, cool. That's fun. No, I don't. The name is familiar, but no, I don't think we worked together. I worked for Pathfinder when I was up there.
Well, if you don't remember me, I was Lorenzo Telleria's instructor after Halle folded.
I totally remember. Yep, sure did. And Front Range also. I instructed there for a little bit, which is when I
Yeah. Sweet. Well, thank you, Jess. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for being here, and I appreciate your input. Thanks for your comments.
Oh, thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right.
See you, Jess.
Take care, y'all.
Those that want to stick around, by all means, we can carry on the discussion.
Yeah, I think there's merit in that. Thanks, Jess.
Yeah, no problem. Talk to you soon. We'll do the show and tell next time.
See you on the next one.
Bye.
Hey, is it Triana? Is that?
Yeah, that's my last name. First name's Mike.
Nice. Okay. Yeah, well, pleasure to meet you, man. Where did you fly in the service? Where did you fly?
Yeah, so I'm still in the service. Started off my Army flight career, obviously at Fort Rucker, but first duty station was El Paso, Texas. So got a lot of flying done there in the American Southwest. Been out to Fort Irwin, California, with them. Deployed to Afghanistan and their southern AO. So a lot of flying around the Hindu Kush. Then after being stationed with 180 Cab, went overseas to Korea and just flew all over that peninsula and the mountains that they've got there. And now I'm in the relative flatlands of the hill country of Central Texas, flying here with 1st Air Cavalry Brigade.
Nice. Well, thank you, brother. Yeah, I didn't fly in the military. I put in a flight packet in 2003 at 29 years old, and it got kicked back for my vision and my age. We'll give you a waiver for one, not two.
At 29, wow, that's weird.
Yeah, that's back when the cutoff. You could turn 30 after flight school, but you couldn't turn 30 before. and they
They,
couldn't get my school date before my 30th birthday, and they're like, in your vision,
Yeah.
we'll only give you a waiver for one.
Man, how things change in the Army. They've upped the
Yeah,
age to 33 now. Yeah,
yeah, but my VA
but
benefits
glad.
made me a pilot in my 40s, so the Army ended up doing it after all.
Lucky. I mean,
Heck yeah, man. I love to hear it.
Yeah, you earned it. I mean, I was talking with Diego. He's a fellow pilot friend here in Colorado. We're actually going to do some Colorado Highland helicopter flying here in the MD in the next couple weeks or month or so.
Oh, nice.
We're gonna head down there.
Where in Colorado do you live, John?
We're in Denver, straight up, right in the city.
Right in Denver?
Right in Denver.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, I live in Longmont.
Oh, okay, sick, cool.
Yeah,
we'll meet up. I flew with Joe at Front Range, but Triana's one of the original members. It was me, Triana, and Jay Skybomb, like the first few study groups together here. Just us talking to each other, going through lesson plans and whatnot. It's really evolved into some.
It's crazy to see the whole board fill up, man. It's like,
it's nice.
it was just 3 of us just the other day.
Yeah, and you guys predicted
Wow.
this. Honestly, you guys predicted it. You're like, one day it's just going to be so many people in here. We're going to need a moderator. And I'm like, now I'm moderating.
When did you fly with Front Range?
I flew with Wesley. I flew with Jessica. I flew with Matt. And that's about it. Matt?
Yeah, that's before me. When Joe started that, he reached out to me, and I helped him get that off the ground.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
And then I left not long after for South Dakota.
Yeah, Matthew. I think Karin is my. It's like my dude, man. I love flying with that guy. And I went down to North Carolina. I followed him back home and flew with him down there. So, hopefully, you can fly with him again. But yeah, great guy. Anybody have any comments on the mountain flying? Anything we want to address while we're on the topic here?
Triana, this might hold merit for you. Is one thing we have to pay attention to in the Black Hills are just upslope winds, bringing in low clouds. Yeah. I didn't hear
about
Jess.
Yeah.
Yeah, because if you have like any higher humidity or precipitation potential, those upslope winds will change everything in a freaking heartbeat.
Oh yeah, I mean it'll take that dense dense mass of air, humid stuff at the lower elevations, and just push it up there. And with that adiabatic cooling that happens 2 degrees Celsius per 1,000 feet, man, it gets it up there, and now you start to have clouds forming at the top. Actually, posted in Max Performance a couple of pictures I've had from my time flying mountains. And we'd see it in El Paso too. The one picture in there is some clouds that are just kind of hanging around the top there, and they've got those puffy tops and flat bottoms. And it's like, okay, yeah, those ones got pushed up, and we still got winds blowing over the top of the mountain too. So I've always kind of joked that to be a pilot, you got to be half a weatherman just to be able to read everything that's going on there and make sense of it. And once you can read the clouds and what they're doing, you have so much more information about what's going on.
Yeah, it's wild.
I wonder how often.
Do you have anything? Sorry.
Well, how often in these if you had these, I guess it would be downdrafts that you fly into. How often could that lead to a kind of a low G pushover scenario, or mass bumping, or uncontrollable sort of, or just surprise inputs? Anybody have any thoughts on that? Because there was that 66 crash.
Yeah.
But especially in the Robinson product.
Well, we fly pretty much predominantly 44 into 66, and yeah, if my recommendation, if you fly a Robbie, make sure it has a symmetrical new horizontal stabilizers. It's wildly different in flying in turbulent terrain, how much a little more stable that makes it to a certain extent as well. In that low, if you ever get into a low G, if you're pretty well in trim, you might have minimal roll, and it could roll either direction, but it's a little more stable in that low G with the symmetrical horizontal stabilizer. But yeah, we deal with turbulence in the mountains, and you just slow down. You don't fly into the mountains at any high rate of speed.
Yeah.
Get an idea of at a slower speed what the environment's doing before you commit to flying faster. Because you can't take anything for granted, and it can change in a heartbeat. So I'd rather be in a more positive position to limit the low G than not. But just flying fast in the mountains is not a good idea. Not in a semi-rigid rudder system.
Right.
Do you guys talk about the 3 bank accounts in like on the civilian side of flying? Yeah, exactly. So same thing, man. Altitude, airspeed, and torque. You got to be able to keep them balanced, and when they're unbalanced, that's when you can really get into trouble. And yeah, everything with mountain flying there.
Yep. And the other thing too is understanding where your power is coming from in mountain flying. By that I mean when you get those updrafts, you're getting a wind-driven power system for the main rotor in a low power setting. If you've got consistent updrafts, which may not feel like an updraft, you just feel like you have good conditions. But those can disappear in a heartbeat, and then you got a huge power demand where you're having to fill the gap from that environmental power to engine power, especially on approach. Load the rotor.
Oh yeah.
Yep. Load it. I hate flying a turbine, especially one without a FADEC in the mountains that on a slow approach, and I've got a low 20 to 30% torque, and I know I'm going to need 70 to 80 depending on weight for a hover. It's like kick it out of trim, force some drag, acquire more power, do whatever you can to get that rotor loaded before you start coming out of ETL.
That's where we've talked a lot, like in Army flying, especially coming into doing like pinnacle approaches like that. We do want to use as much of that updraft as possible because we're typically going to be operating close to our power margins when we're making those high altitude approaches with a full pax load. But we always talk about escape routes, and if we have the time and if the tactical situation permits, if we're in a permissive environment and don't have to worry about getting shot at, we'll do a high recon, we'll do a low recon, and then we'll finally come back around and commit to that landing. And each step along the way, we're looking for like, okay, if I'm seeing a sharp increase or decrease in torque by this point on my approach, then like I know that I could turn around and go back to the valley that I was in. Or seeing on the other side of it, like, okay, if I need to push forward, gain that airspeed, then just follow down the other side, the leeward side of the mountain. I know that I'll be getting torque from that. I don't require as much torque to continue to fly there, and I can fly my way out of things. But yeah, every bit of it is keeping yourselves in a good power envelope, and knowing that as you get closer to that surface when you're doing that pinnacle landing, you're going to need to be able to pull in some torque because you're going to lose that updraft, like you said.
And what if you are getting shot at?
Then be quick or call in for some fire support.
There you go.
Sit on your helmet.
That's also why we got two door gunners in the back behind us.
Yeah.
Suppress, bypass, and report if you're already getting shot at and you haven't put the dudes in. Well, LZ's been fouled. Try again.
Cool.
Here's not a question, and curious, but people's thoughts are. I like to think of the drag curve as the power curve and visualize that through almost every duration of flight. Where am I at in relation to that straight and level line for power? And that really, you can really, for me, it helps finesse like approaches in understanding where I'm at and how far away from that line do I want to be, and whether or not
absolutely
to commit. Knowing, yeah.
Jay,
do you guys talk about bucket speed range in civilian operations?
Maybe not No, not phrased that way.
Okay. So as we defined it, and coming out of the fundamentals of flight, which is a open source document, something that you can find on the civilian side, but in this Army document, we talk about bucket speed range as generally being the area between your max endurance and your max range airspeed, and that pairs up directly with that drag curve, like what you were talking about there. So anything below your max range and you're fighting yourself, and anything anything below your max endurance, you're fighting yourself, and anything above your max range, you're also fighting yourself.
Yeah.
And anything within there, you're pretty safe for your power available.
Yeah, I understand what you call it, the bucket now with that description. We would be like your LD max or your VY. If you're below it, you're requiring more power. If you're, if you're at it, you're at the least amount of power for lift available. But yeah, I referenced that max endurance, VY, max rate of climb, so similar airspeed. But I reference that a lot. Like, all right. And you can finesse a lot and do very little collective inputs, just managing your position on that drag curve line.
Yeah, absolutely.
Jay's commenting on that in the chat, saying keep your airspeed around 40 knots until you're committed to land, at least in the Robinson product.
Yeah. And we in our flying, because we land at a helipad elevated on the eastern side of the hillside. It's not too aggressive of a hillside, but if we get west-northwest winds, it can be a bit of a challenge. So, because you're going to be dealing with some sort of rotors, and there's a cutoff on wind limit for it. But we ride that transverse flow shutter all the way into ETL.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
And that way, I mean, you're loaded, and all you need is a little bit of airspeed to get into full ETL. You never fully lose it. And then create that, because you're operating near, in a mountain environment on high temp days. Your margins are very, very small. Power required to power available, especially if you're heavy.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Ride that shutter, fully developed shutter, not initial shutter. Watch your trim strings on the Robbie. Let your trim strings get a little slack, but stay vertical. And ride the butt wiggle like you're riding a wave. It's tremendous to see how efficient that you can do that and get rotor loaded and not have a lot of needed control inputs to come to a stable hover and stop.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, he also mentioned that some of these strong just circling back to updrafts really quick, some of these strong updraft conditions you can get into a VRS scenario with low indicated descent rates, right?
Yeah, it's very true.
I'm trying to
we fly
visualize
with
that experience. What might that look like? Can you walk us through a scenario where you might get into that, and what?
And at low altitude, on approach, you're more likely going to settle with power than get into VRS. But the initial onset is all very similar.
Yeah.
You just don't have the time to get the power to where it needs to arrest your rate of descent.
Right.
And you're playing catch up. You're way behind the 8 ball.
Right.
But the key thing with that is always have, especially at low altitude, you're not going to have the traditional VRS recovery available to you. The Bouchard's going to be your only option. And know your helicopter, know which direction you're going to bank in that Bouchard recovery, and give yourself that distance. If you're on an approach and there's potential for that, make sure you have that space off to the right to get into that updraft of your rotors to stop that. It's a huge thing on all of my approaches. I'm always, prepared for a downdraft and potentially having to leverage that. I haven't had to, but it's kind of all on how you fly. If you're not loaded, that VRS potential is magnified. So get that rotor loaded. And by that, I mean minimal rate of descent and your power setting. I like to have mine, if you're flying a 44, I like to have it within 3 to 4 inches of my hover power. If I'm in the 66, I like to be above 50% torque. I don't like to have a large, because it's so floaty. It's a very floaty bird. And you'll be in a position where it's wanting to fly and then it just doesn't as you're coming out of ETL, and you need all that power. And that's very unsettling to feel like your seat's dropping out from underneath you. You're not in VRS, but you just didn't prep for the approach to load the rotor and go from that environmental power source to engine power source. It's like a switch flips off sometimes. Because it's wild how much that 66 wants to fly when powered. And that's either an updraft and environmental power, or it's your engine. But it wants to fly, and if the environment powering it, you don't have much power in on torque at all, 20 to 30%. And you can be at a slow rate of speed. You can be at less than 40 knots and still only be at 25, 30%. And you're coming near it at ETL, where you're going to need a massive power demand as you come out of ETL. So, have either of you flown the 66?
No.
I love flying it. It's a great bird, but you just have to know how to think when you're flying it. But it's a helicopter. You just got to understand your torque, your MGT, and how it flies and how you need to fly it safely.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, it's a huge education. Mountain flying, it's amazing how you can fly well over flat land and then get in the mountains, and it's like you're learning to fly all over again.
Yeah. I sent a link for the HATS, High Altitude Army National Guard Aviation Training Center. They've got an app that they produce. Put the link for it in the chat here. But they, for any military aviators, if you can attend that course, they consider it a master class, like you're getting your master's education in flying, just because you're fine tuning so many aspects of being a pilot, wiggling sticks, and not only that, but power management. Truly knowing how to control the aircraft when in those small power margins, but getting that proficiency so that way you're able to do it, but you don't let yourself get to the point where you're approaching those limits. So it's something that I'd love to attend. It's been difficult recently to get out for TDY, but the resources are freely available there for anyone to study, and just being armed with the knowledge is power in of itself.
Yeah, I've known many guys that have gone through HATS, and I would love to be able to attend. But not possible. I don't wear the uniform anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, if anybody on here is, take advantage of it, you can. And man, keep putting in a request. I'm sure you are consistently, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah, we consistently stay so busy that there's not been enough white space on the calendar to be able to do so.
Yeah. So John, when do you head to Southwest Colorado?
To Highland? Yeah, Diego and I are going to do a trip down there. With schedule's still tentative, but we're going to log a couple hours in the MD. They had a special where it was a half hour for $250, and then it's $1,200 an hour after that. So we're gonna try to team up and log some hours together. With an instructor, we can, there can be one of us in the back seat observing and kind of learning, and one of us flying. So we're gonna try to get a couple hours together.
Nice.
Yeah, do some morning flying and some mountain flying. So still unsure of the date, but we booked our half hour for $250. It's gonna be an expensive endeavor, but it'll be fun to get into a turbine, especially in an MD. I think it's money well spent, especially with those guys down there. Really cool crew. So
Oh, that's awesome. You'll enjoy it. You'll benefit from it.
yeah, I think so too. I there's a few other things I want to accomplish before we get down there, so we're not 100% sure on the date, but soon hopefully. Look at this guy. He's
Sweet.
just needing all this attention.
Yeah.
Yeah, look at him. He's like, come on, man. Let's go on a run.
Yeah.
Sweet boy.
Anybody doing any low, slow flying? That's on
I have
right
some
now.
I have some comments for low slow flying over water. I've been doing it in Florida with boat picks. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
It's been quite the experience, for sure.
Heck yeah.
Yeah. Very very aggressive maneuvers, pushing the limits of the helicopter over the water, and I know that. But it's I don't know. I wouldn't call it dangerous. It's just very like high high intensity, sort of very much paying attention to your limitations and you really feel one with the helicopter because you're chasing these boats and it's it's incredible. It's I think it's tremendous flying. It's really good, but you're really on kind of just hyper focused the whole time. Exhausting flying, I think.
Yeah, I bet.
But because you're not only you're just using your brain. You're just so focused the whole time. But it really affords a unique experience out there, and they're really well maintained, very tight, very high quality. Very good. I think quality helicopters. So, and great instruction too. I mean, the guy I fly with down there, Mike, he's an F-16 guy, but turned helicopter,
nice.
and yeah, he's got great experience, great safety conscious guy, and
Excellent.
Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of what you're doing sounds like the combat maneuvering flight that we train. So
Yeah.
a lot of very very low to the ground and dynamic, we could say.
Dynamic. Yeah.
Love the hat, by the way.
Yeah, I'm gonna get some of these out for you guys.
Heck yeah.
Yeah, my resource for embroidery's gonna go away here pretty soon. You guys took a job, accepted a job at Esri in geospatial imaging, part of the airports
Nice.
and aviation division. So I'm gonna kind of be heading that up, which will be really good. Should get a lot of good aviation insight and experience and networking. So I'm excited to
Nice.
start that job here pretty soon.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we'll see where that leads. The ultimate goal is flying, but need to do something in the meantime.
Oh yeah, yeah. Understand that, man.
Yeah.
I've been out of the seat a lot this year, but I've been learning a lot more about the way that the Army works, tactical employment of assets, and getting into the more strategic picture at like battalion and brigade levels. So it's been interesting to say the least. To definitely gained more appreciation for just being able to get in the seat and to go fly.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
believe it. That's kind of where I am now. Just really excited to get at the opportunities when they come, but still working on that CFI.
Yep.
Going to go out CJ soon, hopefully, and keep chugging
Nice.
along. Yeah. Spend some
Heck
time.
yeah.
Where are you sitting at hours, John?
About 220. Yeah. So I just really want to be proficient at when I get into that CFI role. So I'm gonna take some dedicated classes to that. Go CJ, probably, and then go do the Robinson for course before I take the check ride. But yeah, and then flying
Nice.
some aircraft whose wings don't rotate. It's much easier to do that.
Yeah.
It's like those things aren't.
Very-
Yeah, I mean they have their concerns, but I mean they kind of pale in comparison, in my opinion, to how helicopters operate. But
Oh yeah.
yeah, it's fun. It's something to do. It's like $100.
You got the bug, man. You got the
Yeah.
bug.
I just like being in the air, yeah, and learning aviation and just trying
Yeah.
to absorb as much as I can. You guys know how it is.
Oh yeah.
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 Jay, you have anything to comment on the mountain flying? I can hear you.
This
now.
Jay?
Yep, that Jay.
I have a couple of things real quick. I want to answer your question about you. You said, how did that scenario happen with that vortex ring state on
Yeah.
a descent?
Mm-hmm.
So the one I'm thinking of in particular, there's a couple. There was one in New Zealand in 2023. It was an air ambulance approach. And when I worked air ambulance, we had very, very restrictive descent rates. It was like 200 feet per minute maximum descent rate. But mainly it was about identifying hazards, so we had crew looking out for wires and all that stuff, and it was good. But it also meant we were powered up. But in this case, this was I think it was an EC-145 or a Lakota, if you're military. So it's coming in and it's following all those kind of controlled descent rates and everything else, but they're coming up against this real strong ridge. And they've got this really strong updraft. And it kind of ties into what I was saying in the comments is low power is a trap. You're gonna get in trouble one way or another. Not always vortex ring state. It might be over torque or low RPM or whatever. Something's gonna happen with that's gonna go at some point close to the ground, because that updraft cannot exist all the way to the ground. And I think a good rule of thumb is if you are questionable about it, you should go around if you have a real low power setting. But anyway, they come in and they have a pretty low power setting. They're about 300 feet above the ground, and they have a descent rate of 1 to 200 feet per minute, and they get into vortex ring state. And it was because their descent rate was based on gravity, right? That's the way, or air pressure or whatever. But the reality is that the disc was experiencing a much higher updraft than what was being indicated on the VSI. And they got into vortex ring state, and they couldn't recover. And I mean, it's even with Vachard, that's, if you're not expecting it, it's pretty low to the ground. So I think just generally a good rule of thumb is if you've got an extreme updraft scenario and you're pulling very low power, that's great, but you cannot maintain that to the ground and always be ready for. I think Mike, you were saying about kicking out a trim or whatever it takes to try and power the aircraft up. But yeah, we talk about being on the updraft side of things. In those conditions, that's not doing you any favors. Not at that point, not on approach, not when you go below 30 knots. I think you'd have to try and think about how could I come round, maybe if the winds are that strong, if it's that steep of terrain, perhaps, and I think someone else was talking about this, is like coming underneath it. And it's not an ideal position to be in. And you have to, again, always have your out. Always in mountains have your out, always. But the idea is that you could power up early and, feel out the true conditions to the landing point, as opposed to just riding this. If I was a paraglider pilot, which I love paragliding, I've done it for a long time, but that's where we live. That's not a good landing with those conditions. So I think that's one of the things I wanted to talk about. The other one was, I put it in the chat as well. I was like, whenever I go into the mountains, even if I'm only 30 miles away from town, and we're up at 10,000 feet, I keep my jacket on. If I was operating out there regularly, I'd wear something that has some gear on me. I'd choose my shoes a little bit better. Just imagine you get popped in the mountains right now. Are you comfortable with what you're wearing? Are you prepared to spend 24 hours with what you're wearing? We take off from 3,000 feet and people wearing t-shirts and we're going into the mountains. That's a bad idea. And when shit hits the fan, we have just what we have wearing most of the time when stuff goes wrong, especially if there's any kind of post-crash fire. So that's the other little piece I'd add. And the other one, I think Mike was talking about, and maybe even Jessica as well, is using the aircraft as a wind indicator. And certainly with things like the Robinson aircraft or an A-Star that has some sort of trim string, is as you get below 30 knots and the trim strings start to talk to you, pay attention to that. That's your little wind. And not all aircraft have that. The 407, the 206 doesn't have that, and I miss that. I think that's a really neat, low-cost little indicator. You thought the wind was here, but your trim strings are doing this. Pay attention to that, especially in the mountains where you get these very light. If the winds aren't sustained, if you get the other end of the extreme, you get these light and variable winds. they're popping up here with thermals and they're popping up here, and it can change very quickly. You do your recon, everything's good, and you come in on light and variable, and now it's a tailwind. So trim strings are one, twitchy tail. The response to the cyclic, I think, is another one that we don't really talk about much. Is if I have a headwind and I push forward, I get a very quick response on the indicated airspeed. If I have a tailwind, we have to dive that helicopter to get some response on the indicator. Little things like that. And I think someone was talking about, I think Jessica was talking about it, is, do these things before you get into the mountains. So if you have train a student to make a tailwind approach with a safe go around. Like start to feel how the aircraft feels different. When you have a windsock at the airport, it's easy. And everyone's flying in the same direction. But try to train to know this is not a committed landing. This is a feel the aircraft out, learn what the aircraft's trying to tell us. The aircraft knows the wind better than we do. How can we present that as a training opportunity? I think that's the kind of stuff. And I was going to ask Jessica, and I'll ask it to all of you as well. If you trained in Florida or somewhere that's low to the ground, and the mountain in Florida or whatever is 200 feet above the ground, what do you do? How do you get that kind of training? Do you simulate stuff? Do you go off to train somewhere else? Do you just say, well, I'll get that training, at the next job? That's a genuine question. I don't know the answer to that.
In my experience, because most of my training has been in Florida, except for the few times I've flown in Louisiana and here in Washington. So I took a little 5-hour trip to the Blue Ridge Mountains, kind of like John was mentioning. So that's all I have. And the person I was flying with, I could tell, thinking back on the flight, he was kind of inexperienced because he started kind of tensing up as we started getting up in altitude. So I was like, okay, here we are, along for the ride. But we were dropping off at, what was it, R44. It was timing out over at TJ Helicopters or Sevierville County Choppers or whatever. But thank God, worked out for us. But definitely, I know that I need to get out, maybe go fly Utah, go fly, high DA. And then, if I'm going to get a job there, I owe it to myself to at least get 20, 25 hours of more further training. So maybe stack up every year, maybe do 5 or 10 hours just to prepare myself. But on the way down from St. Louis, I just stayed out of the mountains. That was my thing. I was like, I'm not comfortable going through the mountains, so I'm just gonna fly around them. So
knowing your limitations is huge, and knowing that you weren't comfortable with that, or that you might be tense going through there. Absolutely, man. Don't outfly your skills or abilities, or make a risk that you don't have to.
Yeah. And one thing I learned, sometimes we learn hard lessons, but you have to have different limitations for different environments. Because if you're going into the mountains, you're doing a cross country and you have to go through mountains. I mean, your limitations need to be adjusted. You can't apply flatland limitations to the mountains because the conditions are going to be totally different. The helicopter is going to, especially if you have a high DA or something like that. And visibility, I mean, you get into low vis, evening, civil twilight, not quite night, but if clouds roll in and any precip starts, you're being in the mountains is not where you want to be at all.
And there's often not a weather reporting system in the mountains. So what you're getting from the nearest airport is
there's not, and you have to base it on.
Dang, lost Mike.
Oh, he's gone.
Yeah.
Hey, Jeff and Brett and everyone
in.
else. Do you guys, Jeff and Brett and everyone else that's down there, do you guys have any questions or thoughts on mountain flying?
Oh, you asked Jay about like how do you you prepare for that environment if you don't have access to that environment. One thing that we practice as Army aviators is just practicing with power restrictions. Talking about how, like, you get into those high DAs that, like, your power margins start to shrink. A lot of training that we do in those is simulating those environments. We will do, like, for us, we can do a rolling takeoff because we got wheels, but doing a level acceleration, doing things where, like, you're practicing making an approach to a specific point and you're limiting yourself to just your IG hover power. So you're starting your approach from altitude. It's like, okay, this is what I think that my IG power is going to be. And if you've got it dialed in, the aircraft should more or less on approach just settle into that IG hover with very little adjustment from you on your collective. And those same techniques mirror how you should be making an approach to a pinnacle landing when you have winds and everything else to deal with. Because, like you said, if you're making that approach in a low power condition and you're relying on that, let's call it environmental power, to keep you on a steady approach, that's going to give out at some point in time when you get closer to your intended point of landing, and you're going to have to pull in an armpit of collective of power to try and adjust for that, and it may or may not work out well for you depending on your escape routes. So yeah, even if you're on flat ground and at sea level in Florida, just practicing those VMC approaches to a specific point of landing, limiting yourself on power can help you with those mountainous approaches, and even further, seeing what your power performance is going to be like in your aircraft going from sea level up to altitude, up to those density altitudes that you think that you might be operating in, and then limiting your power artificially in the aircraft. Like, say I'm only going to be able to pull to this percentage of torque, and flying around doing regular VMC maneuvers and seeing how limited you are in the aircraft, operating within those self-imposed restrictions.
That's really good.
If the instructor pilots have a rule of thumb, so we would do something similar where we would take off a power, we would knock back in the Robinson product, we'd knock back
Yep.
2 inches of manifold, for example. Do you have something similar in sort of torque percentages, or is it just? We also would sometimes just the instructor pilot would just block the collective and say that's enough. That's what you got. It wouldn't even be a
Yeah.
number.
So we have the ability to prepare a power performance card. I think I've gone over it in other lessons if y'all want to reach back to it. But we essentially calculate for dead sea altitude of where we're going to be taking off, where we're going to be landing to, and just seeing how our power margins change. You guys can probably dig into the manual and figure out, like, what your power margins would be operating at those upper altitudes. And so then you're just reducing your power available artificially based off of that. Typically, though, if we're going to do something like a level acceleration in the Sikorsky product that we fly, we'll typically give ourselves like another 10% over hover power and say, hey, that's all you got to be able to make this takeoff. And as a rolling takeoff, you're going from there. Or we might even be able to might even limit ourselves to just hover power. And that once you get that airspeed going, you get out of effective translation of list. It's amazing to see what these aircraft can do once they got that more efficient airflow, and you just kind of take off like an airplane at that point in time, and then go, okay, that was fun, and now you pick up the collective and make your normal VMC takeoff. But it's truly amazing what you can still do when you limit yourself to like that severely in power.
We'll practice that in the Robinsons too. Just hover power and then slowly move forward, and try to and work into ETL without lifting the collective, without pulling any collective at all. And sometimes your front skids might like touch a little bit as you move forward,
Yeah.
but that's okay. As you gain that airspeed, you'll eventually get ETL. But that's a fun drill too, especially in its practicing for that power limited situation.
Exactly.
I'd love to assign to someone who's scientifically or engineeringly proficient in this. We know that the performance from hover to 53 knots is not a straight line, and certainly with ETL, there's this massive increase. I'd love to see what that curve looks like for each aircraft. Like how much more power do we get in 30 knots, or how much more power do we lose? Maybe more importantly, in that 30 knots. And I don't know if it's universal across all airframes, but that would be interesting to sort of delve into that, because I mean, we know some set numbers, we know the numbers, we memorize the numbers, but what was not really shown to us is how dramatic the changes in performance is between below ETL and above ETL. I think Mike was talking about riding the shutters of transverse flow effect, where you're not in ETL anymore, you're below ETL, but you're also still, at least half your disc is getting a massive boost, and it's I think that's a good physical key of like, we're still good here as long as this doesn't go away. We've got at least half the disc in good performance, and if we can ride this down, and then I think maybe you were talking about sort of accelerating at the very end to get the ETL back if you needed it, if you're super heavy, and it's a technique.
Yeah, that's one of the things is riding that shutter. You'll get an early onset of it, but you'll have a good rate of closure. And if you're going into more of a confined space, that can be unsettling. But if you let that develop, then the trim strings will be taut, and then they'll start to get a little slack, but keep them up. And if they start to loosen a little more, it's just forward pressure on the cycle.
And with
just
that
forward
technique,
pressure, and
it comes back.
You can really finesse it with just attitude and keep that shutter alive. And if you need out, you're hugging that line. If this is the straight and level line, you're just underneath, and then a little forward airspeed, and you're right there, and you're out.
You're back into the pop performance. I assume that when you're using that technique to get into somewhere, you're doing it that's not super confined, because unless you're unloading weight, you're not.
It's not super confined. You have space to do that maneuver. No, super confined. You're fully out of ETL, and you're managing a rated descent on a steeper approach.
Because we push a lot. I personally push a lot of the flight school is powering up early, and unless you're trying to deliver weight, whether it's long line or unloading cargo, that technique will get us in, but then we're screwed. We can't get out. If we can ride the shutters in, awesome. But if you can't shed 200 pounds, we are not getting out confined.
That's the other thing is your planning, and your performance planning. What's the basic empty weight of the helicopter? What do I weigh? What does all the gear weigh? Okay, now this is the basic empty weight with me and all the gear. All right, who am I taking? How much do they weigh? All right. Well, then you back plan. It's just like, well, now I can take this amount of fuel. But if I take the full amount of fuel that on paper says I have OGE hover performance, do I really? And do I want to be that heavy in the environment with challenging conditions and challenging winds? Because I'm riding right at the max power limit. I've given myself no margin. So, it's do all that planning, give yourself a weight buffer, pilot adjustment on weight per the conditions, and you'll give yourself a little more margin of power available versus power required. That's for newer, younger pilots. It's a reverse way of thinking, to where you think like, well, what altitude can the helicopter operate at in OGE? Well, it's like, well, that's all well and good, but that's if all the conditions are absolutely pristine.
Right.
But what do I weigh? What am I carrying? How much fuel can I take and still have OGE performance? So it's kind of a reverse process of what people are trained.
And you make a fantastic point there, that like if you're constantly practicing a good analysis of what gear you're taking and you're doing that performance planning calculations and you're constantly going back and forth and double checking like with your power check like hey how close was I to my estimation there, that builds the repetition, that builds the skill, that builds the confidence, so that way when you do find yourself in that challenging situation where you are just loaded to the max and you're on a high pressure assignment, that you know that because you have that consistency of skill and you've really dialed it in, that you pick up, you do your hover power check. It's like, yeah, that's exactly what I was expecting it to be. And now you know you've got maybe not power for days, but that the power margins that you planned before checking it in the aircraft are going to be exactly what you're flying with.
Yeah. And then dump weight if you don't like what you're seeing in the hover.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm going to guess that being in the military, over talks are part of the. Okay, if it happens, it happens. We got to get out of here. You have, expected. If the limit, and then you have exposure to combat. There's a gray area, and we'll talk about this when everyone gets home safely, right? Do you guys ever get to somehow? How do you ever get to practice what the aircraft is truly capable of, while still staying within limits that aren't going to cause maintenance? You know what I mean? You know what I'm saying?
So a lot of the limits that Army aviators operate with are like downturned from what the actual Sikorsky limits are. If you really start to dig into like the manuals and talk with the technicians, so much of what we operate with is to preserve that, like, say, future combat power. For example, like below 80 knots, we can pull up to 120% torque on the airframe, but like that switches over to once you get above 80, and now you've got 10 seconds to get out of that range, or you've over torqued the aircraft. I'm sure it will do more than that for longer, as long as like you're not temperature limited on the engines. And even if you are temperature limited, we have those continuous we have continuous temperature range, and then like 30-minute, 10 limit, 2.5, that we step it up continuously, so that way we're not just frying these airframes when we're flying in those environments. But yeah, with the dual engine aircraft that we operate, I mean, 22,000 pounds is our maximum, because there are certain caveats to that where you could end up being close to 24, depending on the configuration of the aircraft. So we do get out there, and we do combat maneuvering flight, which trains us to react to those combat situations, taking fire or having to react suddenly, make a turn or dive or whatever it may be. And we consistently train to the edge of those limitations without going over them. So that way, if you have to make maybe a snap turn, or as we would call it, a braking turn, that you've already trained that muscle memory to, like, hey, I'm not going to go over 60 degrees angle of bank. The aircraft will do more than that, and it will survive it, and you'll come back from it. But again, if you don't have that muscle memory with operating close to those limits, then you may or may not go over them when the stress of the situation demands that you be spot on in that. So we get out there. Not only do we do combat maneuvering flight, but we'll do pinnacle approaches to a confined area. Even out here at Fort Hood, there's still portions of our training area where it's like a little plateau, a butte, I guess you'd call it. But we would lay into it. It's got a bunch of trees around it. It's not this big flat open area that we're used to. And it gives us something to aim for. It gives us something where we can self-restrict the power that we have available to go in there, and just really focus on making that landing as smooth as possible. And if we have some winds that day, because it's coming up over the side of that raised terrain, it gives us sort of training wheels, if you will, sort of a feeling of like, hey, this is what it would feel like if you had, I don't know, 5 knots of wind blowing up over the side of this, and you train what could be a dangerous thing if you didn't have skill in a safer condition. So any way that you can find to even simulate the environment that you intend to be flying in just a little bit will definitely help with that. And even synthetic flight training systems can be a great use for that, because we can dial up the temperature and the altitude, even if we're set in the simulator at our local area that we're familiar with. We can take and change those conditions to something that's just hellacious that we may never actually fly in, but you get a feel for how the aircraft would react, even if you don't feel it in the seat of your pants. So yeah, if you really want to get to it and see how the airframe would respond, get into the simulator. Have them mess with the environmental conditions and see if what you've been training in the airframe with those limited power margins would actually translate to a real Earth life condition.
And does the Army have wind limitations on the pilot based on their experience? Like if it's gusting 35 or 40 and you have less than 400 hours, 500 hours, you can't do this. Do they have any kind of restrictions like that to kind of help protect pilots, newer pilots getting in?
So the wind limitations that we operate with our start-stop limitations of our rotor system, outside of that, we do take some consideration to that on our risk assessments that we do before every flight that we go out and do. And really what we're looking more at is the crew mix, because every flight is a two-pilot cockpit. So what may be risky for the junior pilot, the co-pilot, if you will, might not be as risky for the pilot in command, pilot on the controls. So we kind of blend things there and have a safer way of getting our more junior aviators experience operating in those environments, because they've got a safety net. And that's something that I brief my guys on that are coming up through the ranks and get ready to make pilot in command. Like, hey man, take this time that you got right now and like go make all the mistakes that you want, because when you make pilot in command, now you're dad. Everyone in that aircraft is looking to you for answers, bud, and you need to have the skills and the composure to be able to control that aircraft. So we kind of layer things there to answer your question a little more to the point that if weather conditions or if tasks being trained require more skill, then we'll get those junior aviators that skill by having a safety net of a more skilled and senior aviator with them. I think you're still muted, Jay.
Oh, you didn't miss much. I said cool.
Sorry, I saw you talking there. I wanted to make sure I wasn't missing anything.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, you answered the question. Thank you.
It was very cool.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, kind of going along with that. Sorry to jump in. My name is Brett. So in the case of a pilot that doesn't have a two-pilot situation, how or what are your thoughts, you guys that are more experienced, on progressing as a pilot, that you're already as a pilot in command, but maybe like pushing your limits, but not pushing them too far, or regressing your limits, to kind of become a more capable pilot or get better at decision making, whatever it may be. But
I wouldn't push your limits alone.
Push them. So I guess that's my question, is like, there's always that like safety notice in the back of the Robinson handbook, right, that says that pilots under 200 hours can't fly over winds 25 knots or gust spreads such and such. But then suddenly after 200 hours, like there's nobody cares.
Well, that's all. I understand exactly what you're saying, but it's you have to expand your limits, but in a safe way. And the safest way to do that is to fly with somebody with more experience. Because
Right.
otherwise, one of the best things I was told was don't make decisions that put you in a situation to become an involuntary test pilot.
Yeah, pretty much. I wanted to throw in with Jessica was talking about. So this goes to human factors too, and personal limits, right? I do a lot of these in-person seminars, and the fixed wing pilots always talk about, what are your personal limits? You should have them written down, and every quarter or what have you, you should reassess your personal limits. So they're always talking about that, and I'm guilty. I haven't sat there and written them down, but it does sound like a great idea. Like, are you comfortable with flying over 25, with winds that are gusting over 25, or is 25 your limit? Or, so sit down and pretty much what are you going to go with? Like, are you comfortable with flying with basic VFR, or do you need, like, I don't know, more like 5 miles or what have you? So, I kind of wanted to throw that in when she kind of alluded to it, but she had to go. But I think this is a perfect time to kind of go into that and maybe, you as it sounds like you're pretty, I don't know, maybe 200, maybe just under 200, I don't know. But this is a good time to take notes and be like, what am I comfortable with? And then you'll see it starts growing. So
And there'll be some point in flying where you're alone and the conditions change that you did not plan for, and you have to get that helicopter down. But in future weather assessments, after situations like that, if you constantly are flying in the same area, you'll learn local trends. You'll learn to spot. But inevitably, at some point, and I'm sure it's happened to everybody here, you left in conditions that weren't forecast to necessarily worsen beyond your limits, but next thing you know, you have to land a little past your limits. I know it's happened to me. I know it's happened to a lot of pilots. You just stay calm. The more tense you are, the more stressed you are, the less you're picking up on tells from the helicopter. Like Triana said, you gotta keep your composure in the cockpit. Regardless of.
I think that's a great question. I see it a lot at the flight school where people in all sorts of their training say that they don't want to go fly because the winds are too strong. And I realize that if what you need to work on is 180 autos or governor of operations, and it's gusting in the from 10 gusting 22, those are not great conditions. But I think going back to what Mike was saying was like these are the opportunities for you as a student to learn your wind capability in a safe environment where there's an instructor who has that experience. Because next thing you know, you have 200 hours and it's all you, and you come back from your cross country with the student next to you, and now it's gusting 28, and that wasn't forecast, and you've never been there before. So, trying to look for opportunities, even if the flight is a shortened flight. So I'd say to our instructors at the flight school, if you say to the student, hey, I realize this is not what the conditions we want for what we're going to do, is this an opportunity for you and I to go out and get some higher wind experience? And it won't be a full flight block. It might be a 0.3 or 0.45, whatever it is, but to build your confidence in safe steps to be able to deal with this stuff. And at the end of and they're reminding them at the end of the day, most of them are going to be instructors. Most of them will be taking the reins, and it's disappointing as a director of training when I fly with an instructor and I ask them what the highest winds they've ever been at, and it's it's low 20s or even less than that. And it doesn't always work out. The forecast is not the truth. It's not the reality. But the other thing is, Jay was saying about personal limits. I think that's also very, very important, especially once you start getting later on in your training and as an instructor. and setting a 6-month or a 3-month calendar reminder. Let's review this. And it's tricky as an instructor. You can't really say to the student, "Hey, it's my reminder. I have to go. I have to go and up my airspeed knots of 5 knots. So we're going out." But I mean, just the idea of personal minimums. I think, especially in the helicopter world, outside of Robinson, we don't really think about it because Robinson keeps us safe with their 25 knots, or it seems to, in school policies and things like that. But airplanes are much more free to make their own minimums. But I think just sort of talking about it with students is a good idea, and perhaps their solo minimums 12. That's great. Well, let's try to expand that, and let's see. It's gusting 18, but you've never been there before. Let's do a short flight. If you like it, we'll go longer. But let's try to keep expanding your experience while I'm here to keep you safe.
I think too.
Absolutely.
Extending on that a little bit, I think flying solo was immensely helpful for me to build confidence in kind of changing environmental conditions. That if I was with an instructor, I wouldn't have had the kind of the ADM to make those decisions, or I wouldn't have used, I think, my full capacity, falling back on that instructor to give me the confidence that we can get through this. But when it's, making smart weather predictions or weather judgments prior to flying solo, but being confident in being able to fly in conditions as they change or are different than you anticipated, or even potentially intentionally flying into conditions that are right around your limitations. That gave me a lot of confidence as a pilot. One, you hear the helicopter sounds different. You're hyper aware of things that you would otherwise maybe potentially not be, and ultimately all decisions fall back on you. So I don't think that I have a lot of solo time, and but for 220 hours, I've flown about 35 hours solo, day and night. And I think that has been a big confidence builder for me too, in helping understand those limitations and flying through them.
There's merit in that statement. My only caveat with that would be just, it's a fine line. It's a fine line of being, your own personal test pilot that you didn't want to have to become.
But what we do is inherently risky, right? So we've got to, at some point, build the confidence to be able to accept the risk, I think, too. And so I don't know, I don't think it's like, we're not shooting for, what's the word I'm looking for, where you're doing things. No, shit, just drew a blank. You're not just like pissing in the wind. That's not what I was looking for.
Going 0 to 100.
Yeah.
Or
I mean, it's calculated. It's
that was the
calculated
phrase you were
risk.
looking for.
Yeah, calculated risks is what we're taking here, right?
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
Are you talking about being like a bubble boy, like surrounding the bubble, can't get out of the bubble?
Right. And I think a lot of flight training is that too. Like, we don't exceed these limits or whatever, right? And I get that, but there's also real life, and
Yeah, it's true.
Well, as an instructor, I mean, it's my view of what you're saying is filtered through an instructor lens. But
yeah,
you can do a disservice as an instructor by being too handsy and allowing the student to rely on you too much,
which can be counterproductive.
And then but then as an instructor, assessing and seeing like where this person's at and how much can they take on before they're oversaturated and negatively fly the helicopter.
Right.
It's a fine balance, but I would recommend, if you really want to expand your limits, find an instructor that you get along with, or another pilot that has more experience than you, that can act as a safety pilot, that you understand one another, that they understand you. An instructor preferably, but that can understand and not be handsy, or not give the appearance to you that they're controlling the flight and not letting you build the confidence and understanding that you're the one solely in control of the helicopter and they're there as your safety net. That's the challenge of teaching new pilots in the mountains.
Yeah.
People with experience, we're type A personalities. We like to think we already know everything we need to know to fly well. And it's when you get into an environment and it's new and you're not flying well, it's easy to beat up on yourself and you get this, and then it just negatively just consolidates down to this tunnel vision of stress that you're missing every cue the environment and the helicopter is telling you that you can adjust, because we can't achieve perfection. We can only trim toward it, So we don't send guys into the mountains who are already certificated commercial pilots. We don't send them into the mountains alone. They fly with another more experienced pilot to help build their confidence in flying in that environment. Right. To increase their minimums. Hey, let's go fly. Let's go do these things. But alone, bad idea.
Right.
So related to all these questions, hands up who did, when they went through their commercial rating, hands up who did PDPIC. Where you had another instructor on board. Yeah. So that's a tricky one because, there's 10 hours in commercial, I think it is, where you're supposed to fly on your own. And because of insurance reasons, I think that's where it came from. They have this designated pilot in command, I can't remember, but there's this idea that the instructor sits there with their hands, in their lap, and they're just there for insurance reasons. And you go fly solo, but it's not solo, but you meet the solo requirements. I think it's about 10 hours. Yeah. But that's a tricky one. And I think it's kind of circles back to this idea of letting a student safely experience these things. And it's hard for an instructor. As an instructor, those of you that have done it, you just want to give advice and how you would do it and stuff like that. And they're making a terrible approach. You just sit on your hands and bite your lip as they're making a terrible approach into this airport or making terrible radio calls. I don't like PDPIC, but we use it at the flight school for various reasons. But I think that's the same idea. And having an instructor who early enough can realize we're getting close to you being ready for a check ride or solo, and to sit in that PDPIC position or the equivalent of where, okay, on this flight, unless you're about to kill us, I'm just going to shut up. I just want you to do your thing, whether it's in the mountains or anywhere else. And I'll take the controls if it goes bad, but feel free to screw up, and maybe as an instructor I'll learn something. Maybe you'll show me something.
I think when you school hop, you end up doing a lot of that. Like, so on my main place, I was given the helicopter for a few hours and I could go by myself. But when you go to a new place, they don't know you. So a lot of times, even though you're doing most of the flying, you got an instructor with you just for insurance purposes. Because even if it's a 22, they just... nobody's willing to, give you a 22. Yeah, go ahead and take the 22, go fly it around. Too much to go wrong. So that happens a lot when you go from place to place flying. So I've gotten from both. And then as an instructor, I do the same. Like I like to see the student be able to do that cross country with me. That way I can sign them off and be confident, like, hey, they're going to be okay. They did fine with me. It should, unless something catastrophic goes wrong, they should be fine.
I agree with that. And I think that school hopping thing is a big part of that. You can't necessarily rent 22s, but I've heard from a lot of old timers to say some of the most valuable time is that solo time, and it really helps you build your confidence as a pilot. And I fortunately did not do the DPIC, whatever the hell it's called. But yeah, it was. That's one of the reasons I like the school. PDPIC. Yeah.
If I may. Yeah. So, as we've been talking about this, thinking of flying with a safety pilot, as you will, it's a lot of what I do as a tactics instructor. I'm that safety pilot, and sitting here listening to you guys and thinking like, man, how do I get these guys that are fresh out of flight school, fresh out of progression? They're finally signed off to go fly with someone other than an instructor pilot. How do I get them to like unlearn some of those habits, of those safety habits, and teach them how to do the dangerous thing safely? And so, sitting and thinking about it, I would say that there is no growth in comfort, and that there is no comfort in growth. And going through the thoughts of how I would teach a helicopter pilot to nose it forward, see nothing but ground coming up at you, and recover from that dive safely. It's training to that comfort level that you currently have, just to the edge of it. You're right there where it's like, okay, this is manageable. I can do this, but you feel just a little bit of discomfort. And you train until that discomfort goes away. You know that you can perform at that level. So, say like the wind limitations are 20 knots, and you're legal to fly and train up to that. Get really good at flying in those conditions. If that's your limit, train to that limit to where it's a written limit and no longer a personal limit. And then when you're no longer held to those limits, John, I think you were talking about it. You increase it by a couple of knots or something like that. You go flying a day that's just a little bit over it. We're taking those calculated risks, and we're not going from 0 to 100. We're increasing it like a step at a time. And I would say that what you're doing right now is a fantastic step to helping you increase that personal limit. As I tell my guys that like aviation, we got 3 different forms of knowledge. You got rote, you got comprehension, and then you got correlation. And life and our profession, our life in this profession, is too short to make all of the mistakes yourself and to gain all of the experiences. So learn as much as you can. Each bit of knowledge you learn is like a star in the night sky. And eventually, after you fill out that night sky with all those different dots, now you start connecting those dots. And then eventually you start seeing something within those dots. And that's kind of going along that progression of just knowing things to it makes sense. And now all those other things start to make sense together. So you're already on the right track, man, by coming here, talking to us, and trying to learn as much as you can. And that will allow you to make a informed and calculated risk decision as you work to improve your skills as a pilot in command. And I'll say that even having over 1,000 hours in rotary wing aircraft, I still look forward to the opportunities that I get to go out and fly with another pilot in command, with an instructor pilot, because now instead of being dad, instead of being the safety net, now I can practice some of the things that I didn't that I wouldn't try with someone that I'm trying to keep safe. So yeah, absolutely, go grab some instructor pilot time if you can. Even after you've been in the job for years and have hours, still schedule for a training flight. See if you can learn something from a different school. Like what Jay was saying, everyone's got a little bit different technique, a little bit different way of learning from something. And yeah, fill your night sky with stars, man. Draw those constellations.
Thanks, I appreciate that. And also, Jay, long time no see. I don't know if you recognize me, but I was at Leading Edge a couple summers ago. Jay, sorry, in the J-bomb.
You did look very familiar. I was wondering.
No, yeah, no, I appreciate that. I it's kind of everything what you guys are saying is making sense. I fly out on Kauai doing tours, and it's like a big thing is the go no go decision before getting in the air, and sometimes it's a little bit I don't know. you don't have enough information necessarily on the ground till you get up in the air. And so it's like finding that balance of where my personal limit is versus where the actual limit of the helicopter is versus where maybe a company limit is, and so on and such forth. And just working my way through that all while still progressing as a pilot, not trying to be a cowboy. I see how it could come across as wanting to be a cowboy. That's not on my agenda. I have no desire to die out here. But yeah, just what you guys are saying about taking calculated risks, training with other pilots, and just training at maybe what you say your personal limit is, and then, or not training, but flying as PIC at what your personal limit is, and then reassessing as you go makes a lot of sense.
Well, the beauty of it is we're a helicopter. You know, I do survey work too, and there's a lot of clients who are so risk averse they don't want to get the job done, and
Right.
and you're, you know, it's like it may be well within your limits, you know, but there's a potential, and it's just like have those hard set limits so that the minute one of those is even showing any signs of surpassing it, turn around, you know. But there's a lot of times you don't fly, but you totally could have. And I don't want to sound misleading and unsafe, but sometimes in those remote areas, sometimes you just have to launch. And just knowing, just like Jess said, you have your decision point. And that decision point is either geographic or it's environmentally contingent.
Yeah.
And it's a weird thing to navigate and balance, but just if you don't have your limits, you could find yourself in a really bad situation should you choose to fly. But know your limits before you're in the air.
We did a really
Don't adjust them.
We did a really good UIMC presentation in this group and talked about what those triggers are, for example, and it may be a limit, but it may be a trigger, right? That is set, and then you just make that decision once that trigger is hit. That you make a decision
Exactly.
what that is, and knowing that in advance and kind of pre-planning that, like Triana said years ago. He's like my pre-flight. I pre-flight as much as I can to as full detail as possible, so you can be a lazy pilot. So because the decision's already made for you on the ground, right? You've made that decision that if X happens here, then this is the answer, and that's that.
Yeah.
Right, I do remember you came into Chris and I's office. I remember us talking to you in the door frame and a little bit and everything. But to answer your question, I am going back to what would be things that would not go up in the air. I remember working for PHI. It was my first month or two at PHI in the Gulf of Mexico. I'm relatively new to a 407, and I take this client because they're all contracting, different helicopters to different contracts. And I remember taking this contracted client out to this offshore platform, and we land, and this front moved through while we were. While he was doing his thing, whatever he was doing, I guess he was checking on oil and gas something. And then this front moves through, and this massive wind shift, and you couldn't see it. There was no clouds, there was nothing. I mean, all you could see was a line on the, back then I didn't even have full flight, but there's this line moving, and I land into the wind, and then this massive wind shift, and I'm looking at a 30 plus knot tailwind. And I remember having to explain to this guy, because what I've envisioned, and I think hopefully we all do this, is what does the accident report look like? The pilot knowingly picked up with a 30 plus knot tailwind, lost control, span into a crane, write the rest of the story. And that's what I kept seeing was, I don't know this aircraft well enough. I don't feel comfortable picking up in a confined airspace with cranes and crap around with 30 knots. And I remember telling this guy, and he's so disappointed because no one wants to spend the night on a crappy little platform overnight that they weren't expecting. And that was probably one of the highest external pressures I had on wind. Now, if it was a headwind, sure, fine. If it was an aircraft they knew better, probably fine too. But and I never had any of this written down. This was no personal minimums. It was a feeling in the moment against the pressure of this person wanting to go fly. And I wish perhaps that I'd had written these things out, but it kind of worked out.
Yeah, there's situations I've been out on survey where, in different parts of the country and not familiar with local weather patterns. Forecast says one thing, things shift, and next thing I know, I'm landing on next to a railroad track on an elevated bit of ground, waiting out a snowstorm that wasn't forecast. And I'm there wondering if I'm going to have somebody in a 4x4 run fuel to me, or if the weather's going to break, and I'm there 45 minutes with the engines running on a 44, in a snowstorm.
You have to look for the positive. My positive was, what does this platform have in their freezer? What am I going to eat tonight? What interesting food that I've not tried before is in that freezer? You always got to find the positive.
I think part of it too, the positive, is the experience. I mean, what we're talking about is pretty incredible. To be in those positions and then have the wherewithal to make the decision to be safe and get out of it. I mean, that's incredibly empowering. That's one of the reasons I love what we do. It's really living.
Yeah, I've learned so much more about flying after becoming a pilot in command, especially with the Army's program. Since you're there and you've got a safety net all the way up until the point that you don't. You getting through these situations that our fellow pilots here have talked about, it's a confidence booster, knowing that you were in a dangerous situation, you made the right call, and you can carry that with you forward as not only something that we can share with our fellow pilots, but also knowing that your knowledge and judgment skills were on point that day. And like you were saying, Jay, just going through and thinking, oh man, what's the crash investigation report going to sound like from this? Knowing that we were able to prevent that we weren't a headline in the news or another line on a report. There's confidence building in that as well. So, I mean, don't be so focused on knowing everything and doing it perfectly, but know your limits and always try to improve your knowledge base, so that way when you do run into these situations and get out of a hairy situation, it's like, oh, wow, well, I could have done that better, but I didn't die.
Right. Yeah, it's awesome. How you guys feeling?
I think I need to go find some dinner at about 2100 here in Central Texas.
Nice. Well, I think
thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
We beat our previous record of 2 hours by a whole hour today, so we ran up into 3. So this is great.
Heck yeah.